This is one of the world's most ancient crops that has been in use since before we even recorded history. This plant seed may harmlessly adorn your morning bagel, its flowers may bring a pop of color to your garden, but its milk is at the heart of one of today's major health crises. This is the opium poppy.
Papaver somniferum, otherwise known as the opium poppy or bread seed poppy, is as essential for humanity as it is deadly.
The opium poppy is a self-pollinating annual that grows to be up to 1.5 meters tall. It belongs to the Papaveraceae family, a group of over 800 flowering plant species spread over 44 genera, most of which are herbaceous, but with a few woody shrubs and some small tropical trees mixed in to keep it interesting. Most species of this family are popular garden flowers with beautiful blooms, ranging from white to pink and red to orange or purple and yellow. The tiny seeds of these plants share a common dispersal method. They are shaken out by the wind through holes in the top of their dried seed capsules.
People have been purposely planting poppies for a very, very long time. Since even before recorded history, humans have known the power of the poppy.
There is plenty of evidence of opium poppy cultivation all over Europe, the Mediterranean, and West Asia as far back as 6000 BCE during the Neolithic era. This abundance of evidence actually makes it harder to pinpoint the exact location of first cultivation, but scientists believe that the opium poppy is native to the Anatolian Peninsula, or Mesopotamia, which is now modern-day Turkey, Iraq, and Kuwait. At first, the seeds were just used as a food source, but around 1500 BCE, the ancient Greeks made note of the drowsing effect of this plant.
Somniferum, in fact, means sleep-bringing in Latin.
The poppy family is lactiferous. This may sound like a way of saying awesomely milky, but lactiferous actually means that they produce natural latex. This latex is either clear, colored, or white and milky, like the latex of the opium poppy. Plant latex is a sap that's stored in tube-like network structure called laticifer, made up of highly specialized cells all over the plant, except in the seeds.
When lacerated, the laticifer leaks latex. How's that for some alluring alliteration?
The compounds in the latex act as a natural defense against microbes and insects. The drugs heroin, morphine, and codeine are also derived from this latex.
Both the food and pharmaceutical industries harvest their wares from the same part of the plant, the seed capsule.
For the opioid, the latex is harvested 5 to 10 days after the petals have fallen off, while it's still unripe. Timing is everything. If harvested too early, the latex is watery, and too late, and it starts to lose its potency. Once dried, the latex turns from milky white to deep brown, and it's about 10% morphine. It's this latex that is the basis for a host of opioid drugs.
If left to fully mature, the plant forms poppy seeds inside the capsules, which can be harvested for yummy, yummy snacks.
Since the seeds form after the latex, it was thought that poppy seeds do not contain any opioid alkaloids. That was until the late 70s when it was discovered you could fail a drug urine test after consuming poppy seed bread.
It turns out that while poppy seeds themselves don't contain opiates, they become contaminated with morphine from the capsules during harvest.
Most opioids are removed during processing, but some always remain. Convicts on parole are sometimes encouraged to avoid poppy seeds altogether to prevent false positive drug tests.
Traces of opioids from poppy seeds can remain in your pee for 48 hours or more. So if you're having a drug test, you might want to skip that poppy seed bagel.
Dried poppy latex contains 2 kinds of opium alkaloids. One type that includes morphine, codeine, and thebaine acts on the central nervous system. These alkaloids are powerful pain-relieving narcotics and are what make opium so dangerously addictive. The other kind, which includes papaverine and noscapine, are antispasmodic, working to relax smooth muscles, which are the ones that can't be controlled by conscious thought, like those in the digestive system.
Poppy products like morphine and codeine are essential in hospitals for pain relief. But did you know that poppy seeds themselves are also used in medicine?
The poppy seed test checks if there is an abnormal connection between the colon and the bladder. The patient is fed poppy seeds and are then checked for the next 2 days to see if one pops up in their pee.
Who knew there was more than one way for poppy seeds to show up in your urine?
While useful in medicine, the darker side of the opium poppy is, of course, the illicit drug heroin. In 1898, it was discovered that morphine treated with the chemical compound acetic anhydride would yield heroin, a drug that is 4 to 8 times more potent than morphine, and that much more addictive, too. Synthetic opioids that mimic the effect of heroin, like methadone and Demerol, were developed in the 1930s.
These opioids hijack the receptors in the brain that suppress pain and enhance mood, giving users the highly addictive feeling of bliss.
If too much is consumed, in the case of an overdose, the receptors are flooded and block the brain from completing essential functions like breathing. That is why opioids are so deadly and have turned into such a major health crisis today.
For instance, black opium, though sometimes injected, is usually smoked. 5 or 6 puffs. A dream world beckons. Reality is left behind. But problems aren't solved.
Delicious, decorative, and dangerous. Poppies are truly the triple threat of the plant world.
Hey everyone, we have exciting news! We're thrilled to announce the release of Animalogic's very first book, Strange Creatures. This book dives into the most incredible animals we've ever featured on the show, with each chapter packed with my illustrations and stunning full-color images. It's a fun and engaging way to learn about the animal kingdom, and a perfect tool to spark kids' interest in science. Each chapter breaks down an animal's biology, behavior, and all the coolest facts you need to know about these fascinating creatures. Animalogic's Strange Creatures is a must-have addition to your own library, or the perfect gift for an animal lover this upcoming holiday season. Click the link in the description to check it out, and if you can, pre-order a copy. Pre-ordering would help us get an extra bump in the Amazon algorithm, and that would mean the world to us, so thank you so much.
Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice!
Say its name 3 times, and you may just summon yourself a bad habit that's harder to shake than the bioexorcist himself. Chewing it will turn your mouth bright red, and over time, may even permanently stain your teeth. Despite the risks that come along with mowing on it, hundreds of millions of people around the world use this plant to feel invigorated on the regular. This is betel nut. The term betel nut describes the seed of Areca catechu, or Areca palm. This is the best-known member of the 51 species that belong to the Areca genus. It's believed to be native to the Philippines, but grows in the western tropical Pacific, South and Southeast Asia, and even as far away as Eastern Africa. It's chewed primarily throughout India, parts of China, and in a lot of South Asia, where many groups use it because of its cultural significance.
Areca palm is a medium-sized plant as far as palms go, reaching heights of up to 20 meters. Despite its tall stature, its trunk only reaches diameters between 10 and 15 centimeters, classifying this plant as a long, tall Sally.
The fronds can reach 2 meters long and are pinnate, meaning they have lots of little leaflets on either side of the stem. Areca catechu is not to be confused with Dipsis lutescens, also sometimes called Areca palm, which is a common houseplant native to Madagascar that's been naturalized from Florida to Central America and across the Caribbean.
While sometimes called beetle palm, the beetle part of betel nut actually has nothing to do with the Areca seeds itself. The name actually comes from the common practice of chewing them with betel leaves, otherwise known scientifically as piper beetle.
Betel is a vine with glossy, heart-shaped leaves that grows in South and Southeast Asia. It's a member of Peppereaceae, or the pepper family, and is used primarily for adding some hot flavor to the betel nut chewing experience.
To make the matter of its name yet more confusing, while not being related to beetle in any way, Areca nut is also not a nut. It's actually the seed of a fruit, technically classified as a berry. So I guess we should be calling them Areca berries instead of betel nuts? But who's counting?
Betel nuts can be bought fresh, cured, or dried, and are chewed to give users a boost they may soon become hooked on. What makes the betel nut so addictive is an alkaloid called arecaline, which acts as a stimulant. It gives the chewer a high feeling similar to that of nicotine.
The favorite fashionable vice is the chewing of the beetle. Note, the beetle is not a crawling insect, but a biting hot pepper leaf.
Users claim it gives them a feeling of euphoria, well-being, greater alertness, and an increased capacity to work.
Unlike nicotine, arecaline acts on different receptors in the brain, which may be part of the reason why it has an effect on the parasympathetic nervous system. Known as the rest and digest part of the nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system slows the heart, dilates blood vessels, increases digestive juices, and relaxes muscles in the gastrointestinal tract.
Because of its effect on this system, chewing betel nuts can ramp up heart rate, blood pressure, sweating, and even body temperature. It's like a hard workout, just, for your insides.
Like nicotine, arecaline is highly addictive. The signs of a dependency on betel nut aren't hard to miss, as prolonged use stains the teeth in a variety of shades, from brownish red to black.
To enhance its stimulating effect, slaked lime, otherwise known as calcium hydroxide, is chewed with the betel nut. The lime is usually made of burnt seashells and coral and crushed to a soft white powder, which, when chewed, causes hundreds of tiny cuts in the mouth, allowing the auriculine to better penetrate the bloodstream.
When betel nut, betel leaf, and slaked lime are wrapped up together in a little packet to be chewed, it's called a betel quid.
Making up the quid is an art. A slice of areca nut is smeared with tinted lime and wrapped in the leaf of the peppery betel plant.
The contents and ingredients of the quid vary greatly depending on tradition or practice. Sometimes betel quid contain tobacco or have cardamom, clove, or other spices added for extra flavor.
Having a good chomp on a betel nut, as far as we've found, dates back thousands and thousands of years.
An archaeological dig in northwest Thailand revealed traces of likely piper beetle seeds in a site dated between 5500 and 7000 BCE. In Duyang Cave in the Philippines, the skull of a man with beetle-stained teeth from almost 5,000 years ago was found. Later, around the 1st century CE, the first references to betel nut appear in Indian literature.
It's from these discoveries that researchers have speculated its use began in Southeast Asia and moved west over time.
Overchomping on betel nut has been associated with increased risk of developing oral diseases and cancer. Its widespread use has actually been referred to as a neglected global public health emergency. Yikes.
You see those tiny cuts that the slaked lime causes to allow the auriculine to better penetrate the blood? Yeah. They also allow potentially cancer-causing chemicals to penetrate the tissue of the mouth and throat as well.
Once inside, these chemicals change the very nature of the cells. This can lead to all sorts of diseases, including an increased risk of cancers like squamous cell carcinoma, which grows in the uppermost layers of the skin. Papua New Guinea, for example, where betel nut is chewed en masse by men, women, and children alike, has the highest rate of oral cancer in the world.
But it's not all doom and gloom for the humble betel nut. Clinical studies have shown that patients with schizophrenia, for example, may benefit from moderate areca consumption. More studies, however, need to be conducted for us to fully understand the potential benefits of gnawing on the bee nut.
A plant so high on the most unwanted list, there's an all-out war to keep it under control. This tall drink of water produces gorgeous pinkish-purple flowers perfumed with a sweet scent. But this alluring beauty brings some serious firepower to the battlefield, with seed pods that explode at the slightest touch. This is the Himalayan balsam. Policeman's helmet, bobby tops, gnome's hat stand. Depending on where you are, you might know it by any of these adorable nicknames. But don't be fooled by its cutesy, headwear-inspired aliases. This ruthless invader is here to take over.
Impatiens glandulifera belongs to the Balsaminaceae family and the genus Impatiens, also known as touch-me-not.
These plants get their name from the Latin word for impatient, thanks to their aggressive seed dispersal. And impatient they are. One slight touch and the ripe Himalayan balsam pod explodes, firing seeds up to 7 meters away.
That would be like if a palm tree could shoot its coconuts across a football field.
Himalayan balsam gets its name from its region of origin, the foothills of the Himalayas from northwest Pakistan to northern India. But this plant is hell-bent on world domination and has since invasively spread all across the northern hemisphere.
Once famed for its stunning ornamental beauty, the Himalayan balsam is now infamous for hijacking space, light, and nutrients from native plants. Basically, the worst house guest ever.
And Himalayan balsam doesn't mess around when it comes to moving in on native species turf. Each individual, which can grow to around 3 meters tall, can produce up to 800 seeds in its short life. When mature, the seed capsules of these space invaders explosively roll up at the slightest touch. This dramatic display fires their seeds far and wide, ensuring their survival, and choking out their native neighbors in the process.
Now let's see those seed grenades again in super slow-mo.
In areas with established Himalayan balsam populations, and with all those projectiles flying through the air, up to 30,000 seeds can collect in a single square meter. Native species don't stand much of a chance against that onslaught. The seeds of the Himalayan balsam can also survive up to 2 years after it's been ejected, so you know it's ready to play the long game.
One of the main ways that Himalayan balsam spreads far and wide is through anthropokery, which is just a fancy way of saying good old-fashioned human beings. And this is why we can't have nice things.
Thanks to their good looks and pleasant perfume, people just can't seem to resist adding these trespassers to their gardens. And they're not just attractive to humans. Himalayan balsam produces large amounts of sweet, sweet nectar and becomes a regular watering hole for bees.
Drawing pollinators away from native plants is just another 1-2 punch these invaders pull to ensure their success.
But this plant isn't just a danger to native species. It may even be responsible for accelerated riverbank erosion. After pushing out native perennials, the annual Himalayan balsam dies off in winter, leaving the riverbanks it loves so much exposed to the elements and primed for erosion.
These meddlesome beauties are the definition of hit it and quit it.
Efforts are being made in particularly hard-hit areas to combat unwanted Himalayan balsam. In the UK, where the plant has been a pest for 150 years, self-proclaimed balsam bashers organize bashing parties to wipe out invasive populations.
Groups of volunteers get together to yank these out by the roots. Destroying invaders in hand-to-root combat? It sounds like my kind of fun.
A project headed by the Centre for Agricultural Bioscience International in the UK has also leveled up the battle against Himalayan balsam. After 8 years of research, a rust fungus that infects the stems and leaves was chosen as the best biological weapon against this invasive species. The fungus doesn't impact native species and has already started the slow process of eradicating this beautiful killer.
If you live anywhere in the Northern Hemisphere, you're likely to encounter the Himalayan balsam, either out in the wild or in your neighbor's front garden.
Though making pods explode might sound like a great way to startle your friends, to stop the spread, it's recommended not to let these go to seed. And definitely don't trade them at your next seed exchange. It'll shoot you, it'll stab you, it'll poison you. Nope, this isn't the suspect in an Agatha Christie novel. This is one of the most dangerous trees in the world. While its name may sound like child's play, this tree is anything but. This is the sandbox tree. The sandbox tree thrives in the tropics, and we love to head down there to see them whenever possible. Otherwise known as the monkey pistol tree, possumwood, monkey's dinner bell, dynamite tree, or jabillo, the sandbox tree grows in almost all tropical areas of the Americas, especially in the Amazon. The name sandbox tree comes from the use of its ripe fruit as a container for sand, which was used as an ink blotter. Before blotting paper became more common, sand was standard on desks up till the mid-1800s and was used to absorb excess ink. After composing a letter, the writer would sprinkle the page with sand to soak it up.
According to accounts from the time, receiving a sand-filled letter was as annoying as it sounds. Understandably, this fell out of common practice by the late 1800s.
The sandbox tree is a member of Euphorbiaceae, commonly called the spurge family. The spurge family consists of about 7,500 flowering plants that live on every continent except Antarctica. Some famous spurge family cousins include the rubber tree, poinsettia, castor oil plant, and cassava.
But in the case of the sandbox tree, you can forget about the S in spurge. With all the ways it's itching to kill you, this tree is definitely part of the purge.
Everything about the sandbox tree just screams, you gon' die. The exploding fruit, the spines, the poison, just one look at it and you'll turn into a pillar of salt.
Okay, so maybe I exaggerated a little on that last one. But let's unpack the real duffel bag of weapons the sandbox tree has in its arsenal.
First, we have grenades in the form of exploding seed capsules. Don't be fooled by the adorable mini pumpkin-like fruit of the sandbox tree. These poser pumpkins pack a punch. Once they dry into seed capsules, they explode with a bang that has been compared to the blast of a pistol. The force of the explosion flings the seeds at upwards of 240 kilometers an hour and can send them shooting up to 45 meters.
The fastest pitch in baseball is around 160 kilometers an hour. So these trees are chucking out 2-centimeter seeds at around 50% faster than that.
These projectiles can very easily hurt any humans or livestock standing nearby. But luckily, it's pretty easy to predict when they'll go off, since they don't explode at night or during damp days. They need the heat and dry of the sun to set them off. The fruit is made up of 15 or 16 sections arranged around a center axis. The fruit will lose up to 64% of its moisture, to reach a point when it becomes so dry that the sections violently split open and separate from the axis, throwing out the seeds.
In scientific terms, this is when it goes kablooey.
Firing seeds from the parent plant is more reliable than animal or wind dispersal, since the plant doesn't have to rely on outside forces to carry the seeds away. Exploding seed dispersal also reduces competition, with offspring being flung as far away from the parent as possible. One study suggests that for these reasons, exploding seeds may occur in so many different taxonomic groups. Go check out our squirting cucumber video if you need more proof.
Okay, back to the sandbox tree's deadly arsenal. We're moving on to the stabbing bark, which kind of resembles a medieval torture device.
Nothing says "don't climb me" like an entire trunk covered in powerful 1-inch spikes. These conical bark knives are half an inch wide at the base and taper to a needle-like point.
So what does it feel like to climb this tree? It's like bear hugging a bundle of bayonets.
The spikes cover the tree from top to bottom. They are so thick on some individuals that their bases touch, forming a suit of spiked, impenetrable armor. You know, just to make sure you really don't get any ideas about climbing it.
The sandbox tree's third weapon is poison. The fruit is so poisonous that one bite will have you questioning your life choices. Expect violent cramps, vomiting, and everyone's favorite, diarrhea.
The sap of the tree is also a poison that creates a nasty red skin rash on contact. If you get it in your eyes, it may even cause you to go temporarily blind. It's so toxic that its sap was used by some Carib indigenous peoples as the poison for their darts.
Despite it plotting to kill you, some parts of this deadly tree can be put to good use.
Oil extracted from the seeds is said to be a great purgative, if, puking your guts out can be considered great. The leaves have been used to treat eczema, while other extracts may be used to treat conditions from rheumatoid arthritis to intestinal worms. Its seed oil is even being investigated as an insecticide. Due to its highly efficient seed dispersal, the sandbox tree is primed for mass expansion. In Tanzania, in East Africa, where it was once introduced as a shade tree, it's now considered an invasive species.
So I guess in addition to wanting to kill you, the sandbox tree has even larger ambitions. Total world domination. If you live in the tropics, be sure to give this dangerous tree a wide berth.
This plant is explosive. It uses its seed-firing machine gun to colonize huge empires. And it has a poisonous fruit that can damage your soft tissue. This plant is ready to go to war. It's the squirting cucumber. At first sight, Ecbalium elaterium, commonly known as the squirting or exploding cucumber, looks like your average flowering plant. This Mediterranean cutie is part of the gourd family, along with crowd favorites like watermelons, pumpkins, and of course, cucumbers.
Can we pause for a moment to think about the fact that watermelons and cucumbers are both gourds?
The squirting cucumber has pretty little yellow flowers and fuzzy fruits that vaguely resemble its edible namesake. Other members of its family rely on animals to eat those fruits and disperse the seeds through their feces.
But squirting cucumbers take a slightly different approach. They spread their seeds using one of the most dramatic dispersal methods in the world. They explode. It's called balakari, and it works like this.
The squirting cucumber's fruits have very soft cells that accumulate water to produce osmotic pressures of up to 27 atmospheres.
That's about the same amount of pressure you'd feel if you were to dive 260 meters underwater.
If the fruit is shaken and separated from its stalk, it sets off a chain reaction that makes the cells expand and shoot out the seeds. This is the famous squirt, and it makes the seeds fly up to 6 meters away from the plant.
Okay, let's see that again, this time in slow motion.
You can see that the moment the fruit falls off, it just starts firing. At the base of the fruit, there's a hole where it broke off from the stem. That's where the seeds and the fluids shoot out.
There even seems to be a bit of recoil every time it shoots. It's really a seed Gatling gun, like the Gatling P. Zombies, beware.
The only drawback is that it depends on water to build up pressure. So in dry conditions, their ability to shoot out seeds is decreased. If all the seeds fall too close to the parent, they might end up competing for resources.
Every fruit can hold up to 60 seeds, so just one explosion can start a small colony. This form of seed dispersal is rare but effective and is used by several plants around the world.
This strategy has evolved independently in several plant families. Some other examples are the dynamite tree, whose exploding fruits can be heard from a distance. The Himalayan balsam, whose seed pods explode spontaneously when they're mature, and witch hazel, which has a squeezing mechanism that can shoot seeds out at 45 kilometers an hour.
In the squirting cucumbers case, this seed dispersal method has helped them colonize a huge mass of land, from Central Asia to the British Isles. If you're one of the hundreds of millions of people that live in an area where these guys have squirted their seeds, you might be able to watch the show up close.
Your best bet is to look for them in rocky or sandy ground near bodies of water. They've also been observed at garbage dumps and construction sites. They flower in the summer, and fruits are at the largest in the fall.
Historically, they were used in folk medicine, but more recently, their usage has decreased, and their effectiveness has been questioned.
There have been records of people using this plant for thousands of years, going back as far as the ancient Assyrians. Their roots and fruits have been used to make different concoctions that were supposed to combat pain, inflammation, cirrhosis, hemorrhoids, and constipation. A study from the year 2000 showed that undiluted squirting cucumber juice causes irritation and inflammation of mucous membranes. Some of the symptoms are vomiting, pink eye, and inability to swallow.
So please, even though they might look like a natural version of Pop Rocks, do not put these guys anywhere near your mouth. They're literally poison.
Covered in long, sticky tentacles, the sundew is a predatory plant that looks like it's from another planet. Their cute leaves and bright red stalks, which seem to capture and sweeten the morning dew, are the perfect landing spot for an insect. For some, it'll be their last. In sundew country, no one can hear you scream.
Sundews are members of the genus Drosera.
There are about 200 species worldwide, and they live in every continent except Antarctica. They're mostly found in Africa and in Australia, the land that constantly wants to put you 6 feet under. Charles Darwin was fascinated by these plants and wrote about them extensively. While trying to understand their evolutionary history, he said, "I care more about Drosera than the origin of all other species in the world." He was even the first person to report that, on average, it takes Drosera 15 minutes to kill its prey.
Like most other carnivorous plants, their meat eating is an adaptation for life in nutrient-poor soil.
Their prey is consumed not for energy, but for their proteins, which get broken down into nitrogen and used to fertilize the plant. Their roots are great at absorbing water, but pretty much useless at sucking in nutrients. Some species don't even have the enzymes necessary to extract nitrates from the soil.
Since there are so many species, their morphology varies a lot.
Most species have flat leaves. Pink sundews, which are abundant throughout Florida, are one of the most common examples of this. They're easy landing spots for a myriad of insects, but can also be easier to escape. Some, like the North American thread-leaved sundew, have tube-like leaves that unfurl as they grow. The leaves are thin, but they generate enough sticky juice to catch larger insects, like wasps. Others, such as the common sundew, which can be found in northern latitudes throughout the world, have almost spherical leaves. This makes it possible for them to catch prey coming from all directions.
But what they all have in common is the tentacles on their leaves.
They're usually red, which gives the plant an alien-like appearance, and have 2 types of glands on them. The first type secretes the sweet, sticky nectar that attracts and snares insects. The second type makes the digestive juices to break down its prey's soft tissue.
Over the eons, there have been several genera of carnivorous plants that use glue trap strategy to catch prey. What sets the sundew apart is that their tentacles fold in the direction of their prey to maximize points of contact.
Upon landing, the tentacles get activated and move towards the prey. The insect will struggle, but soon it'll get tired and drown in the sweet nectar.
In some species, this can take up to a quarter of an hour. In others, it's just a matter of seconds. Then, the digestive process begins.
Some species, such as the Cape sundew, take it even further by also folding the leaves at the same time as the tentacles in order to fully envelop the insect. Nobody knows for sure how they move their leaves and tentacles, or how they can tell whether it's prey or just debris. It's suspected that the movement is caused by chain reactions inside the cells to make them more acidic and make the cell walls more flexible, which causes the cells to expand.
So it's a very complicated process, but the results are amazing.
People have been fascinated by these plants for hundreds of years and have used it as a way to treat a myriad of ailments. Their leaves are used to treat coughs and ulcers and as an aphrodisiac, though their only proven medical quality is as an expectorant.
Because of their beauty and their unadulterated awesomeness, they're now also common in the ornamental plant business.
The most common ones are Cape sundews and spoonleaf sundews, such as these ones, one of the hardiest Droseras. They produce lots of seeds and require relatively little attention. It's a great beginner's Drosera. This one over here is actually a hybrid called Drosera andromeda. It doesn't move at all when fed, but it's a great plant for cooler conditions.
Aren't they the cutest?
Of course, if you decide to get a sundew or any other plant, make sure you do proper research. They can be very sensitive to minerals in tap water and other external factors in your home. Or, if you'd rather see them in the wild, make sure to look for them whenever you're in a swampy area. The northern East Coast is home to several species. Some of them, like the English sundew and the spoonleaf sundew, can live across the continent, from the southern US to northern Canada.
That's so sticky. It's so incredibly sticky.
Hey guys, today we have sundews. Look at these little guys. So cute. They have two different kinds of glands on them. One is for producing the sweet, sweet nectar.
The other is for producing digestive enzymes for breaking down their meals.
Yum.
These little sundews are carnivorous plants, so they rely on the insects that they catch.
That's because their roots are great at sucking water, but suck at sucking nutrients. Watch this. It's so sticky. Oh my god, do you see that?
It's stretching like spider silk. This is incredible. Tell me something about a sundew.
Sundews come in a variety of different styles, from tubers to epiphytes to swampers.
Tell me something about a sundon't.
This magma-munching cactus is exclusive to the Galapagos Islands and gets its nourishment from fresh lava fields. Growing in shapes that would make your grandmother blush, these prickly pioneers turn barren landscapes into lush habitats ready to be populated by other plants and animals. This is the lava cactus.
Today we're talking about a spiky succulent that's a true trailblazer.
Brachysarius nesioticus, commonly known as the lava cactus, is endemic to the Galapagos Islands and grows exclusively on fresh lava fields.
Lava cactus is referred to as a pioneering cactus, as it's one of the first species to make barren lava fields its home. Its appearance on these inhospitable areas of hardened lava sets in motion big changes for the environment.
All the islands of the Galapagos began as lava, having erupted from several volcanoes to form the archipelago we know today. These fresh lava flows are the last place most plants and animals could survive.
But here, the lava cactus not only thrives, but makes sure other plants and animals do too.
As the lava cools and dries, it begins to crack. This is when the lava cactus gets to work. They spread in wide clusters, growing their roots in the cracks in the lava.
Then, they begin to break down the lava in a process called rock weathering. They do this by releasing bacteria that live in the roots that essentially eat the lava for breakfast.
By breaking down the lava, they liberate the lava's minerals, providing the cactus with nutrients. As the cactus grows, it provides a food source for different animals. And when the cactus stem dies, they begin to create humus, a type of nutrient-rich soil, eventually creating a soil-rich habitat where trees and bushes can grow. Little by little, a once barren ecosystem becomes filled with life.
Without these plants, the Galapagos Islands would be nothing more than bare rock, without a giant tortoise in sight.
Despite their shallow roots, lava cacti can grow up to 60 centimeters tall, and their sharp spines are actually evolved leaves that serve a bunch of handy purposes to keep the lava cactus going.
The spines curb water loss by preventing evapotranspiration, the combination of evaporation from the soil around the plant and the water the plant transpires.
They also help shade the stem and keep its temperature down. And when it does eventually rain, they direct rainwater down to the cactus's roots. As if the spines weren't working hard enough, they obviously also keep the lava cactus from being a quick meal.
No one wants an ouchie snack, except for bighorn sheep. Those guys are crazy.
Ow, ow, ow. Ow, ow, ow. Oh, yeah.
Like all succulents, the lava cactus stores water in its stem for not so rainy days, which it really needs, as the average rainfall in the Galapagos is only about 55 centimeters a year. To further ensure it can survive in these extremely dry conditions, the waxy coating of the stem seals in moisture.
The stems are yellow in color and turn gray or black as they age, and look like... I can't say it.
As for their white frilly flowers, they appear just before dawn, and the blooms shrivel after just a few hours.
In the xeric, or extremely dry zones of the Galapagos Islands, cacti are the most common plants.
The two other endemic species are the candelabra cactus and the prickly pear. Only the lava cactus is a pioneering cactus, though, making it possible for the other two to exist. Candelabra cactus, Jasminocereus thaorsii, gets its name from its fancy candle holder-like arms. There are 3 subspecies on the islands, each with a slightly different look and range. Their fruit provide food for all the classic Galapagos creatures, finches, mockingbirds, as well as iguanas when the ripe fruit falls to the ground. Like the lava cactus, the flowers, which only appear in the morning, are also gobbled up by lava lizards.
As an added bonus, when a candelabra cactus dies, its skeleton remains standing, providing a spooky home for local birds and animals.
As for Opuntia megasperma, or prickly pear cactus, there are 6 different species on the islands, which are eaten by giant tortoises, birds, land iguanas, and other species.
Of these, there are 14 different varieties, which makes prickly pear cacti a great example of adaptive radiation. Now, adaptive radiation is what Big D, Charles Darwin, famously observed in the finches of Galapagos Islands.
He noticed that they had quickly evolved into wide varieties to adapt to their specialized ways of life. Prickly pears have done the same. Varieties that are found on islands with giant tortoises, for example, grow taller to keep their fruits out of reach, while other varieties on tortoiseless islands grow low to the ground. But we wouldn't even be talking about candelabra or prickly pear cacti without the star of our episode.
Thanks single-handedly to the lava cactus, the Galapagos Islands are brimming with utterly unique flora and fauna. Despite having first been described by Darwin back in 1835, not much research has been done on the lava cactus since, which means any of you aspiring botanists could be the next authority on lava cactus.
This utterly unique plant may look dead, but some individuals have been alive since before the foundation of Sparta.
This is Sparta!
While this octopus-like pile of dried-out leaves may not be the world's prettiest plant, it's certainly one of the most peculiar. This is Welwitschia. Welwitschia mirabilis is endemic to the arid and semi-arid regions of western Namibia and Angola. It's the only species in its genus, Welwitchiaceae. The English name for this ancient plant comes from the first European to describe it back in 1859, Austrian botanist Friedrich Welwitsch, but it's more commonly known as tree tumbo.
Carbon dating has revealed that some specimens of Welwitschia are upwards of 3,000 years old. To give some context, that's 1,000 years before the ancient city of Petra in Jordan was built.
And around the time the first colossal stone heads were carved by the ancient Olmec civilization in what is today Mexico. They were sprouting just at the beginning of the Zhou dynasty, the longest-running dynasty in Chinese history, which lasted 790 years.
These plants were already 300 years old when Homer's Odyssey was written. I told you, these guys have seen some things.
Welwitschia range in diameter from 60 to 120 centimeters, but only grow upwards about 30 centimeters off the ground. Their claim to fame is that they've got the longest living leaves of any in the plant kingdom. These leaves grow continuously throughout their lives in 2 ultra-long leathery bands. That's right, that cluster of leaves that make up the Welwitschia are just 2 individual leaves.
At their rate of growth, a single leaf can grow 150 meters in 1,000 years.
The fresh green part of the leaf stays about 3 meters long. As it grows, the ends wither slowly, leaving a long trailing section of dead leaf still attached.
The desert winds whip the leaves, causing them to split into ribbons, making this plant look like a dried-up desert octopus.
These octo-like leaves grow from the large woody stem, which is mostly subterranean. Welwitschia is a phreatophyte, meaning it has very deep roots that allow it to access moisture deep below the surface.
The taproots of the Welwitschia are said to look like giant radishes.
While Welwitschia can live for an obscene amount of time, it can be a challenge for them to reproduce. And seeing a juvenile Welwitschia flopping around in the wind is rare for a couple of reasons. First, a fungus commonly infects the seeds, which affects their viability. It spreads through its namesake, the Welwitschia bug, a local species known to swarm the plant for its nectar. The bug spreads fungus, but it's also thought to be one of the plant's main pollinators. The second reason is that seedlings need more than 55 millimeters of rain to germinate, which doesn't happen very often in the Namib Desert, where it only averages 40 millimeters of rainfall a year.
As a result, groups of Welwitschia that sprouted from the same germination event over the millennia can be found clustered together.
Welwitschia don't live more than about 100 kilometers from the coast, in what is known as a fog belt. The fog is created when the hot Namib Desert air meets the cold current from the Atlantic Ocean. The condensation from the fog collects on the leaves, which are the perfect shape to direct the moisture down to the roots. During times of drought, zebras and other animals will chew on the plant for moisture.
Luckily, the weird and wonderful Welwitschia isn't bothered at all. It just keeps on growing.
How Welwitschia has managed to survive in the desert is still up for debate, since it appears to be hardly thriving in its bone-dry home in both numbers and appearance. Some evidence suggests that this plant wasn't always a desert dweller.
One study hypothesizes that Proto-Welwitschia, which existed as far back as the Cretaceous period, 66 million years ago, grew in zones with much more well-balanced moisture.
This was long before the tectonic plates drastically changed the landscape of today's Africa, and even before an asteroid killed all the dinosaurs. Evolving in a wetter environment would explain why they need such high levels of moisture to germinate, and why they look so lush when grown in greenhouse conditions, and so dead-looking where they live now.
But despite all odds and across thousands of years, this survivor is still holding it down and still captivating us with its tenacity. There's some kind of deep, meaningful life lesson hiding in that heap of brown, dead leaves. Don't you think?
These fungi have been giving us humans mind-expanding trips for millennia. They grow all over the planet, but are illegal almost anywhere you go. During the Spanish Inquisition, they were even denounced as a tool of the devil. But today we know there's much more nuance to these magical mushies. This is the psilocybin mushroom.
Today we're taking a trip with the world's most fantastical fungi, psilocybin mushrooms. Better known as magic mushrooms, mushrooms, or shrooms.
Psilocybin mushrooms actually refer to about 200 different species of mushrooms that grow all over the world.
When eaten, psilocybin mushrooms cause a psychedelic effect that's experienced as hallucinations, euphoria, altered thinking, and changes in perception and mood.
The compound in magic mushrooms that make them so magical is their namesake, psilocybin. Once ingested, the liver converts this compound into another called psilocin. Psilocin molecules are almost the exact same shape as serotonin, the neurotransmitter that regulates mood. Because they're so similar, psilocin can dock itself into the serotonin receptors in the brain, causing euphoria and all the other common psychedelic effects I mentioned.
Fungi are the primary source of naturally occurring psychedelics in the world, and the most potent of them belong to the genus Psilocybe.
Despite the power they pack to send you sailing on a riverboat ride through your own mind, these little brown mushrooms are quite understated at first glance. But bruise or crush them, and most species of this genus will turn a characteristic deep blue.
I'm not gonna lie, seeing a mushroom turn blue sounds like what happens after you eat these psychedelics.
To fathom hell or soar angelic, just take a pinch of psychedelic, wrote psychiatrist Humphrey Osmond to author Aldous Huxley after coining the term in 1956. The word psychedelic comes from the Greek psyche, for mind, and delos, to show. And that idea of looking inward has fascinated us humans for millennia.
Indigenous communities in the Americas have been using psilocybin mushrooms for thousands of years in traditional practices and for medicinal purposes. The Aztecs called these sacred mushrooms astonishing gifts from the gods.
During the Spanish Inquisition, which began in 1478 and was created to enforce Catholic orthodoxy, all cultural practices involving indigenous belief systems were outlawed in lands that Spaniards invaded. They promptly mistranslated the Aztec name to flesh of gods, and these sacred mushrooms were instantly declared blasphemous and a tool of the devil.
This gift of the gods was forced underground for hundreds of years. Yet another victim of violent colonialism.
Its common use today is similarly thanks to exploitation, but this time it came about through cultural appropriation. Mainstream popularity of mushrooms began after the publication of a Life magazine article in 1957 by a former banker that detailed the sacred mushroom rituals of the Mazatec people of Mexico.
Despite promising his guide that he wouldn't share the secrets of that ritual, he published anyway, and interest in this hallucinogenic mushroom instantly spiked.
Just 2 years later, Sandoz Pharmaceutical had isolated, synthesized, and patented the extraction process of psilocybin.
That Life magazine article, which actually coined the term magic mushroom, inadvertently made psilocybin mushrooms an instant counterculture success, beloved by the hippies of the 60s.
This then directly led to mushrooms being included in the Controlled Substances Act of 1970 in the United States and being classified a Schedule I drug. Schedule I, which includes heroin, LSD, ecstasy, and marijuana, means that magic mushrooms are characterized as having high potential for abuse with no medicinal use.
Despite being classified as a Schedule I drug, it's difficult to overuse mushrooms, and physical and psychological dependence are essentially unheard of.
Mushrooms have low toxicity and are generally well tolerated. A 2016 study found that of 12,000 users, only 24 reported having to seek emergency medical care after taking mushrooms.
Overdose for some drugs means death. But in the case of shrooms, overdose can be described as a very, very bad trip.
Expect intense and terrifying hallucinations, panic attacks, vomiting, diarrhea, paranoia, and sometimes even psychosis. An overdose usually lasts 6 to 8 hours, but can take upwards of several days to completely fade. Like all hallucinogens, tolerance is built quickly, so the more you take, the more you'll need to take next time to experience the same result. This increases the risk of overdose, since the potency of mushrooms can vary.
Actually, the biggest risk in taking shrooms is accidentally ingesting a poisonous species, which outnumbers psilocybin-containing mushrooms about 10 to 1.
While other toxic mushrooms may also give you a trip, they can cause anything from gastrointestinal distress to kidney failure, depending on the species.
The long and the short of it is that mushrooms will probably not be the cause of your untimely passing. In fact, they may even help terminal cancer patients cope with the knowledge of their impending death.
Researchers at Johns Hopkins Medicine compared the psychedelic and near-death experiences of 3,000 people and discovered these people all had similar positive feelings about death. Both groups reported gaining personal and spiritual meaning, as well as psychological insight after their respective experiences. Those results dovetail nicely with another recent study that showed that a single treatment with psilocybin in patients with life-threatening cancer created long-term decreases in depression, anxiety, and fear of death, and increases in death acceptance.
This is just the beginning of promising research looking into the treatment of a range of mental health issues using psilocybin.
Attitudes toward this banned fungus are starting to shift as governments begin to embrace the potential medicinal and therapeutic benefits of psilocybin mushrooms. In the US, for example, psilocybin mushrooms have already been legalized in Oregon and Colorado. A handful of countries around the world also have a range of laws legalizing or decriminalizing mushrooms, while others have laws in place that are essentially unenforced.
Though they may sound like something from a Tolkien novel, magic mushrooms are not as mythical as their name implies and can be found quite easily around the world.
Two species of magic mushrooms, Psilocybe cyanescens and Psilocybe allenii, for example, love wood that already has most of its nutrients removed. This means they frequently pop up right under people's noses in the wood chips of urban gardens in the US Pacific Northwest.
These species have been called synanthropes, organisms that love places built by humans for humans. And given their long history of use, I have a feeling magic mushrooms are going to keep accompanying us on our trips.
This is one of the deadliest plants in the world. Eat just a handful of its berries and you'd be in real trouble. A favorite tool of kings, queens, and witches, this toxic plant lives up to its name. This is deadly nightshade. Just to give you an idea, In addition to its common name, the deadly nightshade, it's also been called the death cherry, the devil's berry, and the beautiful death.
And to be fair, it's fully deserved. This plant is insanely toxic.
It contains tropane alkaloids to defend itself from insects that try to eat it. But in vertebrates, those alkaloids affect the smooth muscles of the body, including the urinary and GI tracts and sweat glands.
In some cases, it can cause extreme dry mouth, hallucinations, delirium, and even death. And of course, people have weaponized it.
In the year 1030, Macbeth and Duncan I of Scotland used deadly nightshade tea to poison the invading English troops of Harold Harefoot, killing many of them and forcing the rest to retreat. Emperor Augustus of Rome is rumored to have been poisoned by his wife Livia using this plant. She wanted to make sure her kid inherited the throne. Spicy.
This plant is native to Eurasia, but it's spread to Africa and North America, so there's a good chance there's a few near you. Here's how to identify it so you can steer clear of it.
They're a little over a meter tall, with small bell-shaped flowers and long leaves, which can be about 15 centimeters long. The berries are small and circular, and both the berries and the flowers start off green, but as they mature and become more toxic, they turn purple.
I'm serious. Stay away from this plant. Just 2 berries are enough to kill a child.
The roots are the most toxic part of the deadly nightshade, but a single leaf has enough poisonous alkaloids to kill an adult. The berries are slightly sweet, but if you eat more than a handful, you're in trouble.
Some animals, like rabbits, sheep, and cows, seem to be resistant to its effects. Bees readily consume its nectar and sometimes end up making slightly toxic honey.
Dogs, unfortunately, are not that lucky, so make sure to keep your pooch away from these killer plants.
But of course, industrious people have learned to use it in small doses for reasons other than regicide. In the Mediterranean, for example, it's been used as a cosmetic.
The scientific name, belladonna, means beautiful woman. Up until the Middle Ages, some women would make a sort of diluted tea and use it as eye drops. The alkaloids would affect the normal functioning of the smooth muscles of the eye and would cause pupils to dilate, giving them a unique look. Cleopatra apparently used it regularly, though the product was known to cause long-term damage to vision.
People were really into dilated pupils in those days. Deadly nightshade and some of its toxic relatives have been proposed as medicine for a number of health issues, although there's very little evidence that they work at all.
Chronic pain, irritable bowel syndrome, asthma, and hemorrhoids are just some of the ailments it's been used to treat. Unfortunately, as far as we know, most of the positive effects have most likely been cases of the placebo effect.
But with the right dosage, it's been shown to improve mood, libido, and cause hallucinations. So, in other words, it's been used recreationally.
In the Middle Ages, the church used to carry out witch hunts, which often targeted drug addicts. Deadly nightshade was a relatively common ingredient of witches' brew and caused its users to behave strangely, to hallucinate, and give them the feeling of being able to fly.
Of course, there were other compounds in their brews.
Medieval surgeons used it too, as an anesthetic, but it often caused patients to behave erratically and have vivid dreams. As religious persecution ramped up, its use was discontinued, as surgeons were afraid of being labeled as sorcerers.
So that's the story of a plant that started out by making compounds to fight off bugs and ended up as a favorite of kings, queens, and witches. You might be curious to see this one out in the wild, but just make sure you don't touch it.
The deadliest traps are often the simplest. These carnivores don't need fancy trap jaws or sticky tentacles to trap their prey. Instead, they use literal pitfalls. The pitcher plant is the kind of place you can check out anytime you want, but you can never leave. Their pitchers are nature's way of solving the engineering problem of how to get nutrients from airborne species without them flying away. Like all carnivorous plants, pitcher plants grow in areas with poor soil quality and high humidity. Their roots are specialized for capturing water, but the nutrients are absorbed through the pitcher.
The most common strategy is attracting insects with bright colors and sweet nectar.
The rim of the pitcher is slippery when wet, and once the prey steps on it, it falls to its impending death. The insides of the structure are virtually impossible to climb, and the pitcher is half full of digestive juices that start acting soon after the prey falls in. After a while, the soft tissue is broken down into nutritious nitrogen and phosphorus.
The prey usually dies of exhaustion or drowning. It's like falling into a well of gastric acid or a sarlacc pit.
Pitcher plants are death traps to many, but can also be safe havens. Some frogs, for example, have mutualistic relationships with them. During the dry season, some frogs check into roomy pitcher plants to hide from predators. The cost of admission is poop. The shape and positioning of the pitcher depends on the genus. The genus Nepenthes grows their pitchers at the end of their leaves. This genus has over 150 species, found mostly in Southeast Asia. Several of these species grow in vines on other trees.
Their prey are usually insects, but some species are big enough that reptiles or even small mammals fall in.
Nepenthes raja is one of these species. But in addition to small vertebrates and insects, this pitcher plant has another food source: poo. Some rodents, such as tree shrews and rats, get attracted by the large amount of nectar the plant produces. The mammal sits on the rim of the pitcher and licks the inside of the lid. At the same time, it poops to mark its feeding territory, and the droppings fall in the pitcher, where they're easily absorbed.
This is a classic example of mutualism. The rodent gets calorie-rich nectar, and the plant gets nutrient-rich turds.
Nepenthes are literal death traps to some animals, but to others, they're a fundamental part of life. Some mosquito larvae, for example, can only develop in the juices inside Nepenthes pitchers. They survive by eating the larvae of other animals whose eggs happen to fall in. Similarly, the Nepenthes bicalcarata, also known as the fanged pitcher plant, is host to swimming ants. The ants live in the plant's tendrils and rely on the pitcher contents for food. They usually ignore small prey, such as these microhyla tadpoles, and go for larger prey, like this Aristolis hoverfly larva. In exchange for free meals, ants give the plant nitrogen as feces and keep the pitcher clean by taking out rotting animals. The process of removing a large arthropod can take up to 12 hours, so the ants really have to work for their daily bread.
The Americas are home to the trumpet pitchers.
These differ from Nepenthes in that the entire leaf forms a pitcher. The results can be amazing. The cobra lilies of the West Coast look like a snake about to strike. The sun pitchers of South America have slits that allow them to get rid of excess water.
Here in Canada, the purple pitcher plant is known to catch young salamanders from time to time.
These plants, along with other members of the genus Sarracenia, host larvae of mosquitoes and other insects. When prey falls in, the larvae eat it and turn it into feces, which are easier to absorb by the pitcher plant.
Here we have some Nepenthes species. These ones are easy to recognize because their pitchers come straight out of the end of the leaf. The midline of the leaf throws a little tendril, which has a bud in the end and becomes a pitcher. These guys are a little small to be eating things here in the studio, but out in the wild, they would be munching on biting midges, mosquitoes, other things that we're not super fond of.
Because of the conditions they grow in naturally, pitcher plants have very specific soil and humidity requirements. There are too many species to give blanket advice, so please make sure you do your research if you get one.
The most common way that people damage these little guys at home is by feeding them human food. So please do not feed your pitcher plants burgers. They might be super into rat turds, but that does not mean they'll eat anything.
A hyperproductive weed that's taken over the world. A master engineer whose seeds can travel 100 kilometers without anyone's help. The bane of the persnickety lawn gardener's existence. This is not your average flower. It's the Mary Poppins of plants, the dandelion. Dandelions are all part of the genus Taraxacum. Depending on who you ask, there are between 60 and 2,000 species. plant taxonomy is pretty messy. Experts can't agree if slightly different, closely related organisms are separate species or just subspecies of the same species. Taxonomy messiness aside, if you've seen dandelions in a field, you've probably encountered the common dandelion or the red-seeded dandelion. These two Eurasian species have been introduced worldwide for their medicinal purposes, but more on that later.
Their name doesn't come from their resemblance to dapper African felines. It comes from their French name, dent de lion, which means lion's tooth, for their serrated leaves.
And it makes sense that early descriptions of the plant focused on the leaves. It was one of the most accessible leafy greens available to the masses. They're usually blanched and sautéed and used pretty much the same way as spinach. That actually looks pretty yummy.
These days, the focus is on the flower head. The little fluff balls use one of the most primitive methods of seed dispersal, but also one of the most effective.
The dandelion's fuzzy ball starts out as a yellow flower head. After a couple of days, the petals dry out and fall off. Then, it starts growing the parts that we know and love. The dandelion's blowball, or clock, is a group of tiny little flowers. Each of those little flowers is called a floret. When you blow a dandelion, you'll notice that the lower part is thicker. This is the fruit of the plant, and inside it are the seeds. The long stalk is called the beak, and the fluffy part at the top is the pappus. The pappus does a lot of heavy lifting when it comes to flying. The pappus can have over 100 hair-like filaments, which turn it into a parachute.
For thousands of years, naturalists have known that these florets can travel vast distances, up to 100 kilometers. But it's only recently that researchers have figured out how.
The pappus increases aerodynamic drag, which slows down the speed of descent of the florets. But similar to parachutes, which have a hole in the middle, the filament of the pappus only cover about 10% of the space, which means air can flow through it. This creates a low-pressure vortex above it, meaning that the higher pressure air below the pappus pushes the floret upwards. The weirdest part is that this experiment showed that this method creates 4 times more drag than having a regular parachute.
Unfortunately, it only works for very lightweight objects, so don't get any crazy ideas.
Dandelions are so good at seed dispersal that a single plant can populate a hectare in a year, and that hectare can produce close to 100 million seeds by the following year.
So no wonder they can quickly become an undesired weed.
Lawn gardeners and farmers might not want them taking up space and competing with their plants for resources, but animals don't seem to mind at all. A huge variety of insects snack on dandelion pollen, including some fan favorites like honeybees and butterflies. Mammals, especially ungulates, readily eat the weed, which gives them a healthy dose of calcium. In fact, horses were known to enjoy eating dandelion leaves so much that it's been nicknamed horseflower and horse lettuce.
And of course, people use it too. Every part of the plant is edible and has been used for both food and medicine.
Teas made with the flower heads, leaves, and roots are sometimes used to treat stomach and liver issues.
The most effective usage is as a diuretic. Dandelion root tea is so effective at making you pee that the French call it pissenlit, which means pissing in your bed. Pardon my French. So there you have it, an incredibly prolific plant that took over the world by being an expert at aerodynamics. So next time you see one in the street, stop and appreciate it. And after that, eat it. Why not? It's full of vitamins A and K. And if you have to pee, have some dandelion tea.
A clingy cactus that's actively looking to stab you. A desert dweller with legendary hardiness, and a forbidden fruit for only the most daring animals.
You ready for round 2? Round 3?
Look at this.
Oh my god, is it bleeding?
Yeah.
You're about to enter a whole world of pain.
Ow! Actually, that hurts a lot. Jesus Christ.
This is the Jumping Cholla. Recently, we've been talking about plants and fungi that do weird things to reproduce. From stinky flowers that attract flies to pollinate them, to weeds that collapse into a ball and drop their seeds as they roll along.
Oh, my car.
Today's plant takes a slightly more stabby approach. Jumping cholla is the name, ruining your hikes is the game.
This cactus from the American Southwest and the Mexican Sonoran Desert looks like your average cactus. It has a woody trunk that can grow up to 4 meters tall, which is fairly tall for a cactus. Its stems are cylindrical and covered in sharp spines. The spines grow in such density that from a distance, the plant looks fuzzy. Its relative, the teddy bear cholla, is even more dense and resembles a furry animal.
And just like with an actual wild bear, it's best to stay as far away as possible. Those spines are there for more than just protection.
Although they do flower and make fruits with seeds, it's these prickly stems that have helped them thrive in their ecosystem. The cholla grows in segments, and when something brushes up against them, their highly barbed spines stick in, and a segment of the cholla breaks off and travels along with whatever touched them.
This is kind of like the beauty of it. It's so strong, like the edge is serrated. It requires like 100 times more force to get out than to get in.
They break and attach themselves so easily that they give the impression that they've actually jumped on you.
And that's where they get their name.
While they may look smooth, the spines are lined with rows and rows of backwards-facing, microscopic barbs. Not only that, but the spines swell when they stick into a host, absorbing moisture from the host's flesh. So it takes a lot of force to take them out. And when you do, the hooks and barbs rip skin and muscle tissue, making the whole ordeal incredibly painful.
Ouch. How's it feel?
Like I've been stabbed by a cactus in the hand. Ow! Actually, it hurts a lot. Jesus Christ.
Animals like javelinas can carry them for several kilometers, and hikers have reported catching cholla on their clothes and not realizing till much, much later.
But once the stem is removed and it lands on the ground, it starts growing. This new plant will be a clone of its parent.
As the stem grows older, it hardens into a woody branch, and the spines fall off.
Fruits grow at the ends of the branches in clusters. Year after year, more fruits will be added to the cluster, giving the ends a chain-like appearance. In some parts of their range, these plants are known as the hanging chain cholla.
Like other cacti, this species can hold a lot of water. Some animals, like the bighorn sheep, have learned to deal with the spines just to get to the juicy stems.
Rams, especially, are very effective at using their horns to remove the spines. Barrel cacti are another common meal. So altogether, cacti represent a nice oasis for thirsty animals in the desert. The Sonoran Desert can go for months without rain, so every little bit of moisture is appreciated, even if it's a jabby hassle to get it.
We unfortunately don't have the horns to do that ourselves. So if you ever happen to touch a jumping cholla, this is what you should do.
Try not to touch it directly with your hands or put it close to your face. The stems can easily get stuck in another spot, like when you're trying to remove a piece of tape and it keeps getting glued to your other hand.
Okay, this is the jumping cholla part. See that?
Yeah.
Just 2 steps and like the whole thing just comes off.
A useful tool to get them out is a comb, which you can use to remove the stem. If the spines are still in, try using a nose plier. It'll hurt, but it'll get the job done.
Alternatively, you could just avoid going to the desert altogether. It's a very weird place. No, I'm just kidding. I'm super excited to go to the desert, check out some Gila monsters, some crazy cacti, all that stuff.
Ow!
Strangleweed, devil's guts, witch's shoelaces. These sinister nicknames are fitting for a plant that chokes and sucks the life from its unsuspecting victims. If plants could dream, this parasitic vine-like vampire would certainly be their nightmare fuel. This is the daughter.
Today we're talking about cascada, commonly known as daughters, and even more commonly known as the anaconda of the plant world. Okay, it's not really called that, I just made that up. But maybe after today's video, we'll call it that. Let's see.
This genus of around 170 species of parasitic plants can sniff out their victims before strangling them and sucking their life force. The evil cousin of the Convolvulaceae family of beautiful morning glories, the daughter is one relative you don't want to tangle with.
Most species of dodder have completely lost the ability to photosynthesize, lacking the chlorophyll that typically makes plants green and is responsible for turning sunlight into energy.
That's why dodders appear in a variety of non-green hues, like yellow, orange, pink, and brown. And that's also why they need to sap off their hosts for energy, since they can't produce enough of their own.
The process of how a dodder goes from seed to energy vampire is a choreographed dance that requires perfect timing.
Dodders begin as independent little seedlings, germinating in the ground with their own roots in the spring and summer. They emerge as leafless stems, which lasso counterclockwise until they find the helpless stem of a host to wrap themselves around, at which point their own roots die off.
Due to their basic AF in-house food production system, if these plants, which are definitely Team Edward, can't reach a host within 3 to 5 days, the seedlings will wither and die.
If they do manage to wrap their deadly tendrils around the closest host, they first cement themselves to the plant with a layer of pectin, a type of carbohydrate that works as a binding agent.
You're probably no stranger to pectin. You might have even had some this morning on your toast. It's the same stuff that makes jam and jelly deliciously gelatinous.
Within a few days of gluing itself to the host, the dodder's own roots die, and it sprouts haustoria, root-like structures that penetrate the host's stem and start sucking its juices.
I told you, the dodder is a fang-wielding vampire.
Scientists have long wondered how the dodder locates its hosts. To add the bloody cherry on top of this cake of horrors, researchers at Penn State University determined that dodders can actually sniff out the chemical signals of their victims. And dodders have very discerning taste. They can tell plants apart based on their scent and will grow towards their faves.
I guess it's kind of like standing in a food court and letting your nose guide you to the closest burrito stand.
Once attached to their host, these Dracula wannabes spread at an alarming rate. Growing about 7 centimeters a day, dodder can completely blanket an area of 3 meters square in a single growth season.
That's bigger than a double bed!
A dodder is an insatiable creature. Once established, it branches out to other surrounding plants to start sucking off of them too, making a thick mat of tangled, choking vines. And to add injury to injury, the dodder can actually transmit viruses from one host to another.
They're basically nature's super spreader event.
To complete its deadly life cycle, the dodder flowers. These cream-colored, bell-shaped blooms usually appear in clusters and produce 2 to 3 seeds each. One species of dodder, Cuscuta australis, picks up on protein signals from the host plant to initiate flowering. This synchronized flowering ultimately helps the dodder flowers attract more pollinators, therefore ensuring its continued success.
Dodder seeds can stay dormant in the ground for 5, 10, up to 30 years, depending on conditions. That level of immortality is something only a vamp can truly understand. Resistance against the deadly dodder may seem futile, but some plants have actually evolved to elude the dodder's deadly embrace. Some mallows, like the upland cotton and the Hawaiian hibiscus, both form a type of wound tissue that prevents the dodder's haustoria from penetrating its stems. This is the stake in its heart. With no energy to suck, this dodder is dusted.
Dodder only spreads by seed, so stopping them from going to seed is a great first step towards preventing future outbreaks. Extra precautions have to be taken when working in areas with dodder infestations. Clothing and equipment should be cleaned thoroughly to prevent spread. Because by the time you notice it spread to your area, you're already dead. Well, if you're a plant, of course. 5 massive petals covered in spots. 1 enormous center chamber. And a scent that's, let's just say it's definitely unforgettable. Introducing Rafflesia, the gigantic, parasitic jungle plant.
Rafflesia arnoldii is the biggest flower in the world. These guys can weigh up to 7 kilograms and stretch up to 1 meter across.
Now maybe some of you are thinking, hey, isn't a flower like Titan arum way taller? Sure, but technically that plant is made up of many tiny flowers.
Rafflesia arnoldii is the biggest single flower, a lone beauty.
Rafflesia is extremely rare and only grows in the jungles of Southeast Asia. In Indonesia, where Rafflesia is the national flower, it's referred to as Padma, a term that originates from the Sanskrit word for lotus. In Sumatra, they call it Krubat, which means great flower. The biggest member of the genus got its scientific name from Joseph Arnold, the first European botanist to have found one and made it back to Europe with his notes intact. Arnold named the flower Rafflesia arnoldii, after himself, of course, and the leader of the expedition, Sir Stamford Raffles.
Though it was actually Arnold's Malay guide who pointed out the plant on the expedition, despite sharing none of the naming glory. Typical.
The name Great Flower is well earned. Rafflesia has no stems, no leaves, and no roots. It only grows as a parasitic plant inside vines on the jungle floor, specifically one type of woody vine in the genus Tetrastigma. The parasite threads its way through its host vine's tissue, stealing its water and nutrients and growing stronger. When a bud finally manages to break through the vine's bark, it develops for about 10 months. By the time it's ready to bloom, the bud generally measures 12 inches in diameter.
The largest bud on record was 43 centimeters across. That's as big as a beach ball.
Finally, the flower blooms. In a process that takes several hours, the fleshy lobes unfold and bam, the Rafflesia in all its glory.
Bloomed Rafflesia has 5 leathery, red-spotted petals.
They converge into a center chamber that resembles a massive pot. Is anyone else getting Val Plume vibes here? The center is large enough to hold 6 liters of water. Inside the opening are a bunch of spiky protrusions called proboscis.
Researchers still aren't exactly sure what the proboscis do, but one theory is that they produce heat that intensifies the plant's stench. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I forget to mention the Rafflesia stinks?
Rafflesia mimics the smell of rotting, dead animals, just like the Titan arum, or the corpse flower. The leathery, red, warty petals mimic flesh, and little hairs inside its center complete the illusion.
But why would you want to look and smell like a decomposing carcass? Hello, flies.
Carrion flies are immediately attracted to the male Rafflesia's stench and color. They buzz their way into the center hoping to find food and a place to lay their eggs. Once they're inside, a sticky mass of pollen is deposited on their backs.
In a perfect world, the flies would then transport the pollen from the male plant to the female plant for cross-pollination. But that plan only works if there's a nearby female Rafflesia. And since this flower is so rare, that barely ever happens.
It doesn't help that the flower doesn't live very long. Less than a week after its bloom, the Rafflesia rots and dies, leaving behind a slimy black mass. Kind of creepy looking, but then again, this is a parasite.
The Rafflesia was always rare, but now it's really, really rare. Of its 28 known species, 2 haven't been seen since the 1940s. Here's why.
Most buds never reach maturity or even get to bloom. They're often poached or harvested by locals, either to serve as a delicious Thai delicacy or to use in herbalism. Many believe that Rafflesia helps cure fevers, pain, and acts as a sexual stimulant.
Because nothing sets the mood like the smell of rotting flesh.
But the main reason Rafflesia is on the brink of extinction is deforestation. Humans are destroying its rainforests. And if its host vine gets destroyed, it has nowhere to grow. Hinging your species' survival on just one type of Southeast Asian vine? Pretty risky. But historically, that vine has fed the flower very well. So well that Rafflesia evolved into the biggest flower on Earth.
And that's nothing to sniff at. Get it? Sniff? Because it smells bad? I'll see myself out.
This massive tree is one of the largest things to ever live on our planet. Climate change and overlogging almost made them disappear. But now, the king of trees is making a comeback.
Giant sequoias are huge. They live for thousands of years, and they've evolved to withstand forest fires. Depending on your definition, they are the largest things to ever live. We're gonna need to take a minute to understand just how massive these things are.
The tallest giant sequoias get to around 90 meters tall. That's about as tall as 3 blue whales stacked up head to tail, or about the same height as the Statue of Liberty.
But their real claim to fame is their mass. They're the heaviest of all trees, and most importantly, the thickest.
These trees are so massive that individual trees get names and are almost like celebrities.
These are the Harambes and Cecil the lions of the plant world.
A thick giant sequoia named General Grant holds the record for largest diameter at 8.8 meters. A triceratops playing hide and seek could comfortably hide behind this tree. But the record for the most massive tree on Earth belongs to its cousin, General Sherman, which, with a diameter of 7.7 meters and a height of 84 meters, claims the undisputed heavyweight title. The tree is estimated to weigh over 2,000 tons, or about 400 big ol' elephants.
Getting that big takes a while, like a couple thousand years. In fact, some of the oldest giant sequoias were already about 1,000 years old when the Roman Empire was founded.
There have been reports of giant sequoias with over 4,000 rings. But unfortunately, they were from tree stumps, back when these trees were being logged heavily. As a side note, the only tree species that routinely lives longer than the giant sequoias are the Great Basin bristlecone pines, with some individuals confirmed to be close to 5,000 years old. The oldest living tree in the world is a bristlecone pine called Methuselah. Its location is a secret. All we know is that it's somewhere in the ancient bristlecone pine forest in California.
There must be something in the water in California, because wild giant sequoias are also only found there, though it wasn't always like that.
During the last ice age, giant sequoias were common across North America and Europe. But as the glaciers receded and the climate changed, their range receded. Then, when European loggers got to California, with their gnawing, biting, breaking, hacking, and burning, the sequoias were decimated once again. Luckily for them, the wood is relatively brittle, and since they're so wide, cutting them down was a huge hassle.
And so, it was more efficient for most logging companies to focus on other trees.
Additionally, most people recognize their majesty and importance, and most of their current range has been protected since the early 20th century.
The bad news is there's only 81 groves left in the wild.
All of them are found in the western slope of the Sierra Nevada range of California, and they're considered an endangered species.
You might be wondering, why doesn't the giant sequoia, the biggest of all the trees, just eat all the other trees?
Well, they might be the most badass trees in the world, but they are kind of needy. They like to live in humid climates, ideally in mountains at altitudes between 1,000 and 2,000 meters. At lower altitudes, they become susceptible to fungus and parasites. They also require lots of nutrients from the soil, so they rely on forest fires to kill the competition.
Because, like the mother of dragons, the giant sequoias are well equipped to withstand fire.
They even drop their seeds immediately after a fire, as it's the perfect time for a seedling to grow without other plants vying for their resources. And lastly, they need a lot of water, so they can only grow naturally near streams and other bodies of water.
Even if you plant them at home and take care of them, unless they're in the right conditions, they might not produce cones, and they won't be able to reproduce.
Well, that doesn't mean people haven't tried. Since the 1860s, people have been falling in love with their big trunk energy and have tried to grow them elsewhere. The countries with the most giant sequoias outside of the US are Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the UK, and France. Some of these places already have trees that are over 150 years old. The largest of them is in France and is already about 60 meters tall.
But if you want to see the OG giant sequoias, you still have to go to California. And while you're at it, you can visit their oldest living relatives, the coastal redwood.
Along with their cousin, the Dawn redwood, they're collectively called simply the redwoods, and they're part of the cypress family. They each belong to different genera, but all their genus names make reference to the word sequoia. It's thought that they were named after Sequoia, the creator of the Cherokee language writing system.
Of the two, the most impressive is the coastal redwood. It's not as thick as the giant sequoia, but it can be even taller.
The tallest trees in the world are all coastal redwoods. Hyperion, the tallest known tree, is over 115 meters tall. That's more than a blue whale taller than General Sherman.
Luckily, they don't compete with each other because they've adapted to live at different altitudes.
Coastal redwoods usually live close to the coast, at elevations under 750 meters. The third redwood, the dawn redwood, is native to China and only gets about 35 meters. But due to its beauty, it's been exported and is now common across the US and the UK.
So if you're close to California and it's safe to travel, go visit Hyperion, the two generals, and all of the amazingly huge redwoods. Just a word of caution, it will make you feel very, very small. Oh, and watch out for scout troopers.
Blink, and you'll miss this aquatic carnivorous cutie's strike. In just a few milliseconds, it sucks in its prey at up to 4 meters per second, trapping its victim in a watery grave to be digested for precious nutrients. These unique and complex suction traps make it the fastest known plant in the world. This is the bladderwort. This genus of over 200 species of carnivorous plants is found in freshwater lakes, marshes, streams, and waterlogged soil on every continent but Antarctica.
Given their adaptability to whatever their environment throws at them, you're likely to find them anywhere where there's shallow water or boggy conditions. Don't forget to bring your waders.
Bladderworts are divided into two categories: terrestrial, living in wet, waterlogged, or temporarily flooded areas, and aquatic, either suspended and free-floating on the surface, or fixed with a few shoots nestled in the substrate.
The main above-board attraction on these rootless plants are their colorful snapdragon-like flowers.
Such a wide range of species also means that bladderwort blooms come in a rainbow of colors, from red to yellow to purple to pink and white.
We've mentioned before that Big D, Charles Darwin, was a huge carnivorous plant head. In his 1888 book, Insectivorous Plants, he says the bladders offer the chief point of interest. And indeed, they do.
The bladder in bladderwort comes from the tiny sacs under the surface that the plant uses to suck in its prey at turbo speeds. Its victims include zooplankton, water fleas, aquatic worms, amoebas, and mosquito larvae, to name a few.
Fighting mosquitoes at the source? That's my kind of carnivorous plant.
The expression hair trigger is an apt description of the mechanism behind the bladderwort's impressive ability to capture its prey. Tiny hairs on each bladder trigger it to spring open so quickly that a vacuum-like force sucks in whatever set off the trap. The door then slams shut, sealing the delicious snack inside.
While the traps of the bladderworts are the smallest of all carnivorous species, ranging from 1 to 6 millimeters, they win the prize for the most sophisticated. Sorry, Venus flytrap. Better luck next millennia.
To suck in its prey at such super speeds, each hermetically sealed bladder has negative pressure compared to the water around it. When the trap is triggered, water shoots inside, taking its victims with it.
The bladder is lined with two types of glands. One which secretes digestive enzymes to zoopify their prey and absorb the nutrients, and one which is responsible for pumping water. But glands aren't all you'll find in a bladderwort sac.
Did you see it? Well, I told you not to blink.
Within each tiny sac live commensal microorganisms, bacteria, microfungi, algae, and more. In this relationship, the microorganisms get easy access to food in exchange for helping the bladderwort break down its prey. But it's still not always clear to researchers which microorganisms are commensal and which are actually prey themselves. The ones that can't survive the low oxygen environment of the sealed bladder trap likely become the appetizer for the bladderwort's next meal.
There's still a lot that scientists don't understand about how Utricularia's complex bladders break down and absorb nutrients, and the detailed role that commensal microorganisms play in the digestion. Maybe one of you aspiring botanists will one day crack the code on Utricularia's mysterious bladders.
Owning your very own terrestrial bladderwort requires some special care and attention. In addition to a few hours of light a day, these water-loving carnivores need continuously moist soil.
Which, after all this aquatic talk, duh.
Master their care, and you too can experience the wonder and complexity of this highly advanced carnivorous plant at home.
Do you smell that? Are those fingers coming out of the ground? It's been fun, guys, but I think the zombie apocalypse is upon us. No, I'm just playing. These are not ghouls, but they do smell the way I think zombies might smell. These are the weirdest, stinkiest fungi on the planet, the stinkhorns. Hey guys, I'm Tasha the Amazon, and you're watching Floralogic. And though this show is called Floralogic, we're actually all about delving into the worlds of both flora and fungi. So let's start our expedition into the world of fungi with one of the stinkiest on the planet, the aptly named stinkhorn mushroom. Mushrooms are universally beloved creatures. They look adorable, they taste delicious, they give Super Mario his powers, but the stinkhorn looks so alien and smells so foul, you would be forgiven for thinking a Demogorgon took a number 2 in your backyard.
Their smell, despite being nauseating to us, is a key part of their reproductive success. Most fungi reproduce asexually by releasing spores, which can then grow into another spore-producing individual. But like plants, fungi have a dispersion problem. How can they ensure their spores travel as far as possible so that the next generation can colonize new areas?
Most spores are very light and can be picked up by the wind, but stinkhorns took a page out of the tapeworm playbook and adapted to be dispersed by animals. This is where the stank comes in.
All stinkhorns secrete a substance called gleba, which is basically smelly spore jello. This gray goop smells like a combination of rotten eggs and putrid meat, which is exactly the type of thing flies love to eat. The flies will eat up the gleba in less than a day and fly off. Some fly species can eat over 1 million spores in one sitting, and the majority of those spores will germinate in the fly's digestive tract.
Gleba also has laxative properties, so after a day, the fly will defecate and the germinated spores will be released. The next part of their development is slowly growing into a ball, or an egg, also called a witch's egg.
These eggs already contain all the compressed components of a fully grown stinkhorn. Some species even produce edible eggs. The common stinkhorn eggs are said to taste like radish. During this stage, they're often mistaken for puffball mushrooms, but if you open them up, you can see a clear difference. Puffballs are usually uniformly white, while a stinkhorn egg's cross-section reveals different tissues of different colors and textures. After a few months in the egg form, they get ready to erect themselves. They pump water into the inner tissue and it expands while secreting gleba to attract flies. Soon after, the external structures break down and its life cycle is complete.
So starting out as an egg and growing into gleba-producing structures are the common features of stinkhorns, but the diversity of ways they do this is amazing.
The most common one is Phallus imputicus, or common stinkhorn, which gets its name from Greek. It means immodest phallus, and it can grow from a 5 centimeter wide egg to a 30 centimeter tall phallus in just 2 days. This guy is definitely a grower, not a shower.
Despite their amazing biology and diversity, stinkhorns are the bane of gardeners and picnic throwers everywhere. They can pop up literally overnight and stink up your entire backyard, and there's no fungicides that can prevent the growth of stinkhorns.
The veiled lady stinkhorn is a weirdly beautiful and apparently delicious fungus. It's found worldwide, but it's most commonly found in Asia, where it's used in stir-fries and fancy dishes like bird's nest soup.
In East Asia, it's considered an aphrodisiac. I wonder why.
And in Mexico and New Guinea, it's been used in religious ceremonies. But the coolest stinkhorn is the devil's fingers. This frightening fungus looks like something straight out of the mind of H.R. Giger. Not only do the eggs look like something from Alien, but when they sprout, these massive red tentacle-looking bits burst out of the eggs. When it's sped up, it looks pretty disturbing.
Just don't put your face too close to it. You'll probably be fine, but you'll smell like you were juggling rotten skunks.
The Australian anemone stinkhorn is like a baby version of the devil's fingers, with a few more arms and a deeper pool of gleba. This one is kind of cute in pictures, except for the weirdly bulbous stalk. The basket stinkhorn grows like a large woven sphere and can be up to 20 centimeters tall. It contains high levels of carotenoids, the compounds that make carrots orange, but we weren't able to verify that they're as delicious. Have you ever seen anything that looks like this? And the adorable dog stinkhorn, one of the tiniest stinkhorns out there, looks like something out of a fairy tale. Except its name doesn't come because pups like it, but rather because it resembles a doggy's reproductive organ.
There are over 70 more species of stinkhorns. We won't go through all of them, but if you want to see them and smell them, just go for a walk in the woods. There's sure to be some in your area.
And if your day gets ruined by the scent of rotting meat outside your window, just remember, it's the miracle of life. A penis-shaped fungus is making stinky spore soup so that flies will eat it and poop germinated spores in your neighbor's garden. A destroyer of forests, and possibly the largest organism to ever live, even bigger than the giant sequoias. Armillaria challenges our ideas of what it means to be an individual. What makes this parasite such a successful killer that can live for thousands of years? This is the Armillaria fungus, the humongous fungus. Nope, we're not telling you to become a whaler and hunt blue whales, or to wear your finest flannel and become a giant sequoia lumberjack.
The largest organism in the world is actually a delicious mushroom, the size of about 1,800 contiguous football fields.
This humongous fungus's real name is Armillaria osteae. Members of its genus are commonly known as honey mushrooms due to their delicious yellowy caps.
Don't get too infatuated with these cuties though. This fungus is a parasitic tree killer that can wipe out forests.
In 1998, Malheur Forest in Oregon was a botanical crime scene. 112 trees had mysteriously died. Investigators scoured the forest, collecting evidence from the roots and the soil. After bringing them back to the lab, they realized the murderer was Armillaria osteae, and that trees as far as 4 kilometers away were being parasitized by the same individual. Further research showed that the fungus was 9.1 kilometers squared, 4 times bigger than the country of Monaco. It is also about 35,000 tons, which is about 250 blue whales. And it was around 9,600 years old.
Once they get to a tree, the fungus spreads root-like rhizomorphs under the bark and around the roots, absorbing all the nutrients. Eventually, the tree dies.
This particular individual has managed to survive this long because the Pacific Northwest has a huge density of trees, and thus a steady source of food. The humongous fungus specializes in Douglas fir, pine trees, and other soft woods. Luckily, their growth is incredibly slow, only a few meters per year, and it can be blocked by planting more resistant trees, such as hardwoods. But when unimpeded, it thrives. The fungus has adapted to consume both live and dead plant matter, so unlike other parasites, it doesn't have a need to keep its hosts alive.
One of the weird things about this mushroom is that it doesn't grow like plants and animals. Instead, it can create clones and then fuse with them into a single organism. Weird. The system works like this.
Armillaria reproduces sexually. The delicious yellow mushroom caps you see above ground release the spores into the air. There are two types of spores, which are not technically male and female, but work in a similar way. If the two types of spores get in contact with each other, they form into a fungus. If the two spores were released by the same fungus, the new individual will have the same genetic makeup and will be technically a clone. It'll grow independently, spreading its mycelia, which, in fungus, are the equivalent of roots.
Most of the fungus mass throughout its life will be mycelia. You might have even seen some of this at home in food that's getting a little old.
If this new individual gets in contact with its parent or another clone, it will fuse with it, becoming just one organism. They continue doing this for thousands of years, and eventually, you get a humongous fungus.
You might be wondering, is a network of fungi really a single organism? The answer is, of course, technically yes.
By definition, an organism is a group of genetically identical cells that can coordinate to do something together. The cells at the tip of the nose of a giraffe are genetically identical to those at the tip of its tail, and so are the cells of the edges of the humongous fungus. The difference is that in the fungus's case, they started in what looked like a completely separate body.
If you're far from Oregon, you can still see these giant fungi all over the world.
If you can, and it's safe, go to your local forest in the fall and look for honey mushrooms. You can tell them apart by the gills under their cap, the ring on their stalk, and the white spores they leave if you put them on a hard surface.
They might not be the same species, but they'll likely be part of a large network of genetically identical mushrooms.
And if you happen to see Armillaria mellia at night, you might even run into a light show, because this species has bioluminescent mycelia.
We can't tell you to eat anything you find in the wild, but if you find these at a store, they're delicious in stir fries and pasta. Let me know your favorite recipe.
A voracious carnivore, an expert trapper, a deadly siren. The swamps of North Carolina are home to one of the most effective predators in the world, and it's a plant. This is the Venus flytrap.
The Venus flytrap is probably the most popular carnivorous plant on the planet, even though it only grows in a small swampy area in North Carolina.
At first sight, the Venus flytrap looks like a regular garden variety swamp plant, but it does something few other plants can do. It catches insects by attracting them with sweet goo and shiny colors. The tips of its leaves can be bright like a flower, and they emanate an irresistible, ripe, fruity smell. Attracted by the sight and smell, when a prey steps onto the open leaves of the flytrap, they touch tiny sensitive hairs on its surface. If two hairs are touched within a few seconds of each other, it triggers a chain reaction, which causes the leaf to close, trapping the prey.
It's a bit like a bear trap, but it can swallow its prey whole.
The leaf has interlocking finger-like structures called cilia that, when closed, transform the leaf into a hermetically sealed stomach. This prevents the prey from escaping and keeps fungus and bacteria from getting in and potentially damaging the plant. Then, digestive enzymes are released, and the prey's soft tissue gets liquefied and absorbed by the plant for up to 2 weeks. At the same time, antiseptic juices are secreted to keep the prey from rotting.
As cool as their hunting strategy is, isn't it a little bit overkill? After all, millions of trees do just fine without having to trap bugs. Well, the secret is in the soil.
Venus flytraps and most other carnivorous plants live in areas with very nutrient-poor soil. In this case, they're native to boggy and swampy areas, so instead of getting their nitrogen from the soil through their roots, they get it from animal protein through their leaves. Yum!
Despite their name, Venus flytraps don't specialize in flies.
They actually prefer bigger land insects, such as beetles, spiders, and even ants. They're bigger, and thus it's more energy efficient for flytraps to catch one of them than to catch multiple small flying insects. Equally as important, they don't trap the insects that pollinate them, like sweat bees and longhorn beetles, as they play a crucial role in their reproduction.
The other part of their name comes from their supposed similarity to female genitalia. It seems the scientist who named them wasn't very familiar with the female anatomy.
Back to energy efficiency, it costs a lot of energy to close a leaf. That's why they have multiple trigger hairs to prevent an accidental closure when hit by a drop of water or a falling leaf. Nobody knows exactly the mechanism they use to close their leaves, but it's hypothesized that it's due to a rapid flux of ions and water that move in and out of cells. This changes the shape of the leaf, turning it into a trap.
But not all carnivorous plants close their leaves like this.
Some are happy to snare their prey in thick goop, or to trick them into falling into pitchers. In fact, despite the absence of a fossil record, there's a widespread belief that their ancestors looked more like mouse sticky traps. The development of a closing leaf was probably to prevent prey from escaping or being stolen by other predators. And the development of trigger hairs occurred as a way to prevent accidental closures. Despite all these adaptations, they're not doing that great in the wild. Their numbers have decreased by 95% over the past 40 years due to climate change and habitat loss.
They've been protected in North Carolina since the 1950s, and since 2014, poaching wild flytraps can land you in jail for up to 2 years. Imagine being in jail like, what are you in for? Luckily, vast numbers survive in homes and greenhouses, so unlike our animal episodes, in Floralogic we can actually encourage you to get one.
If you bring one home, make sure you plant it in peat moss and water it with distilled water. Some dissolved solids in tap water, such as salts and minerals, might damage or kill the plant.
So take good care of it and enjoy your little carnivorous plant baby.
What looks like a cactus, smells like a corpse, and has flowers that would rival any star in the sky? This stinky succulent is perfectly adapted to attract flies while making humans want to skip lunch, and probably dinner too. This is the carrion plant.
Hold on to your nose hairs or they just might curl. Today we're talking about the stinkalicious Stapelia gigantea, otherwise known as the carrion plant.
The carrion plant is the goth king of southern Africa. The erect, 3-centimeter wide green stems of the carrion plant make it the perfect cactus dupe. But this stinky Stanley is actually a succulent, which are defined by thick and fleshy tissue that is specialized for storing water. Cacti are a subgroup of succulents, so while all cacti are succulents, not all succulents are cacti.
In the case of the carrion plant, this succulent is actually a member of Apocynaceae, the same family as milkweed.
Other less cadaverous names for the carrion plant include giant toad flower, Zulu giant, and starfish flower. But if you want to find out how this succulent ended up with a name like carrion plant, just follow your nose.
Carrion plant flowers emit a rotting flesh stench that is unmistakably stomach-churning and definitely deserving of the moniker.
This clustering succulent forms clumps that can sometimes reach 1 to 2 meters across. It's the most widely north-south distributed of the roundabout 29 species of Stapelia and can be found all over southern Africa.
Thanks to its unique characteristics, it can also be found as an ornamental on the shelves of the world's bravest and possibly most nose-blind succulent collectors.
Jokes aside, there's a good reason for all the stink. The scent attracts all manner of death-loving carrion flies who are fooled into fertilizing the plant. Pollination by carrion flies even has a specific name, sapromyophyly. Rafflesia and the corpse flower, which we've already covered on our channel, are two other examples of plants that use this sneaky scent scam for pollination purposes.
Unlike in the human world, there are certain advantages for plants that have major BO.
Carrion flies, for example, are present year-round, so they can pollinate year-round as well. In the case of the carrion plant, their blooms unleash their stink onto the world and are ready for pollination in the fall, when shorter daylight hours trigger the blossoms to open. But why do flowers produce scent at all?
Flowers are basically multi-sensory billboards for passing pollinators.
The objective for the plant is to get the pollinators, which could be bees, flies, wasps, ants, butterflies, moths, or even hummingbirds and bats, to touch their reproductive structures. The pollinator, in turn, gets a yummy snack out of the deal in the form of pollen, nectar, or oils.
It's a real you scratch my statement, I'll scratch yours situation.
But in the case of carrion plants, this relationship between fly and flower is actually one-sided because the fly gets no reward whatsoever for paying a visit.
Instead of offering a sweet snack, the carrion plant is an expert at what's called brood site mimicry. The flies see and smell the flower, and thinking they found a heap of rotting, stinking flesh, they oviposit. Or in lay flies' terms, they lay their eggs.
In the process of ovipositing, the flies will inadvertently touch the reproductive parts of the carrion plant, which is just what the carrion plant was hoping for. And this one-sided relationship only gets more toxic after the flies have left their eggs behind.
Unlike actual rotting meat, the flower lacks the protein that the larvae need to survive, so they will inevitably die.
One study even suggested investigating the carrion plant as a potential tool in fly control for this very reason.
The carrion plant takes being a multisensory advertisement to the extreme, with not only its pungent perfume, but also its looks. It looks like a large, fleshy starfish baking in the sun. And it kind of smells like one too.
Its flower is one of the largest in the world, with these star-shaped blooms reaching up to 40 centimeters wide. They can vary in color from cream to pale yellow and are covered in red or pink zebra stripes and fringes of hair.
Everything about the size, shape, color, and scent of this plant screams hairy, rotten carrion. A blowfly's dream come true.
While the flies might be loving it, the same can't be said for people in certain regions around the world where the carrion plant is being investigated for its invasive potential. In Pakistan, Honduras, Australia, Hawaii, and Venezuela, for example, it's already escaped cultivation. Like milkweed, carrion plants produce seed pods, and the seeds themselves are adapted to wind dispersal, with each individual sporting a tiny parachute.
In 1 square meter of carrion plant, there can be up to 1,500 seeds, and with a 62% germination rate, these plants are more than ready to Mary Poppins down into new areas and start stinking up the joint.
The carrion plant was used by various cultures in southern Africa as a medicinal plant to treat everything from hysteria to pain and to induce vomiting. Currently, it's being pharmaceutically investigated as a potential appetite suppressant.
And I think it's working because just talking about this stinker is making me wish I skipped brunch.
Despite their stink, carrion plants are grown ornamentally by strong-stomached enthusiasts. They're relatively easy to propagate from stem cuttings or seeds. Like most succulents, it's important not to overwater these demogorgon-looking plants.
Just like me, carrion plants cannot tolerate temperatures below 10 degrees Celsius, so just make sure to keep it toasty. And as long as you treat your carrion plant well, it's very likely to flower. In case you want your place to smell like rotting, stinking flesh, this is the plant for you.
A moving plant that hides from predators when it feels their touch. A little legume that goes to sleep when the sun goes down. A smart perennial that has learned to be less shy the more it's exposed. A role model for most of us, this is the Mimosa pudica. We've talked about carnivorous plants before. They move to catch prey, but today's species moves for an even more relatable reason. It doesn't like to be touched. At the mere hint of a caress, they fold their leaves inward, as if they were bracing for impact.
They're called Mimosa pudica, but nope, they're not named after an ingredient in your favorite Sunday brunch beverage. The cocktail is named after an Australian yellow flower, also called mimosa.
The mimosa we're talking about is native to Central and South America, though it's been introduced to every other continent except Antarctica. Its name comes from the Greek mimos, which means mimic, as in they mimic the movement of animals, and pudica, which means shy. And their name is well earned. These plants will only open up when they're feeling pretty good. They'll close immediately if something touches them, if it's too hot, too cold, or if its stem is being shaken.
This is not just run-of-the-mill coyness. This is actually a very effective self-defense technique against their two main worries in life: dehydration and being eaten by a vegetarian.
Most of their range provides enough rain to keep them hydrated, but it's also in the tropics, where the sun can evaporate the moisture of unprotected plants. If the Mimosa pudica senses it's too hot out, they'll close their leaves to prevent the water from evaporating. And while other plants have thorns or chemicals to deter herbivores, these guys just hide from them as much as they can. Turning their leaves inward makes them look more like a twig and a lot less appetizing than other leaves. And of course, to an animal, a moving plant seems sketchy at best, especially because one closing leaf can start a chain reaction that makes several hundreds of leaves close simultaneously. So, no thanks. Better leave it alone and eat literally anything else.
If you see one outside, go ahead and tickle it. See it move. Just don't overdo it. It has huge energetic costs and can even affect their photosynthesis. Which brings us to the question, how does it move?
Like other moving plants, such as Venus flytraps, they have an elaborate mechanism that changes their cell size by adding or removing water. It's kind of like holding a sheet of paper between two air balloons. If you deflate one slightly, the angle of the sheet of paper changes. This mechanism is also activated at night when the plant goes to sleep. There's no reason to be open if there's no sunlight to absorb. And, as we mentioned earlier, it's a lot safer.
Not all mimosa puticas live in the same environment, and some are touched more than others, usually by harmless objects like droplets of water and passing animals, so they've evolved to learn when to close.
Sensitive plants need to maximize the time they're open, so in areas where they're touched a lot, they learn to be less sensitive. This also happens in areas with low light, as they need to absorb all the light they can get. This makes sense, but the tricky part is, where do they store the information they learn? There are a couple of theories, one of which posits that the frequency a plant is touched changes the way their genes are expressed. But again, it hasn't been proven.
If you're a grad student looking for a research subject, consider helping us understand how plants learn. Unfortunately, for Mimosa pudica, some animals are catching on to their ruse and finding ways to eat them.
Silk-weaving predators are their worst enemy, as they use their threads to immobilize their prey. A classic Spider-Man move. Spider mites and mimosa worms, which are really steel gray moth larvae, are their main predators. Both are difficult to control and can quickly kill a plant. So if you have them at home, make sure to keep an eye on them for parasites. These plants go to extremes, growing where others dare not go. From hella hot to chilly cold to super salty, these plants thrive in places most would wither and die. These are the extremophiles of the plant world, the extremophytes. Salting the earth was a tactic historically used by conquering armies to prevent their conquest from being able to rebuild and regrow. While too much salt in the soil or water is deadly for most plants, there are a select few that are known as halophytic, or salt-tolerant.
For these plants, salting the earth would be like rolling out the welcome mat.
Only about 2% of terrestrial plants are halophytic, meaning that these salt-loving weirdos are a rare breed.
The genus of Salicornia are the most salt-tolerant plants in the world. Their name even comes from the Latin word for salt. But they're also commonly known as sea asparagus, sea beans, and pickleweed.
These edible and delicious plants range from the Americas, Europe, Africa, and Asia, and can be found in the saltiest places you can think of, like salt marshes and on the seaside. Optimal growth for Salicornia is achieved at about 1.75% water salinity, but it can tolerate water twice as salty as seawater, which is a savory 3.5%. You can even water your Salicornia with seawater. Plants in the genus Thalangella are true weirdos in terms of what they can take from their environment. Commonly called saltwater cresses, like Salicornia, these plants are halophytes and can tolerate high levels of salt.
But Thalangella take it a step further and bounce back even after being frozen solid, and can also regenerate after long periods of drought.
Thalangella salsaginea, the plant formerly known as Thalangella halophylla, has become the poster child in the study of extremophytes and the model for stress tolerance.
Because of this, it even had the honor of having its genome sequenced.
Turns out it's gone through so many adaptations to be able to live in extremes, its genome is twice as large as its close relative, Arabidopsis thaliana.
Those specializations need a lot of code.
Our next extremophyte gets the award for northernmost plant, Saxifraga oppositifolia. More commonly known as purple saxifraga, this plant thrives in the high Arctic, specifically the northernmost part of North America, where winter temperatures average -23 to -32 Celsius, and it's also found at high elevations in the Rocky Mountains and the Alps. It's such an iconic tundra plant that it's the official flower of Nunavut, the northernmost territory in Canada.
It's so used to the cold that it's actually difficult to grow in milder climates, which is the exact opposite of how I thrive.
When it comes to high altitudes, though, there's one plant that comes out on top. Aramagone bryophylla is a small flowering plant that takes the prize for highest altitude. Native to the Himalayas, this plant has been found growing at elevations of over 6,000 meters, or more than 20,000 feet. That's 2/3 the way up Everest.
Let's crank it up and move to extreme heat with a plant that might be part of your skincare routine: aloe vera.
Aloe likely originates from the deserts of the Arabian Peninsula. For thousands of years, we've been hacking this succulent's adaptation to living in hot, dry desert for our own moisture.
This goopy Gus is such an essential part of our self-care that aloe vera is a $13 billion a year industry.
The thick and juicy inner mesophyll layer of the leaves evolved as a reservoir of water for the plant to keep up with photosynthesis during droughts. Now grown everywhere in gardens and pots around the world, this unique adaptation to extremely dry temperatures is what made aloe vera such an essential part of humanity.
Interestingly, aloe vera is one of the few plants that we actually call by its binomial, or scientific, name.
Another plant that can take the heat is Yucca brevifolia, otherwise known as the Joshua tree. Native to the deserts of the southwestern US and northwestern Mexico, and famous for the Californian park that bears its name, the Joshua tree can live in extreme heat, 35 to 40 degrees Celsius in the summer, for hundreds of years. Death Valley isn't so deadly for Joshua trees.
Not only can they survive sweltering desert temperatures, mature Joshua trees are covered in a fire-resistant bark that can even help them survive fires.
Special mention for their ability to take the heat goes to the mosses of Yellowstone Park, which grow around the park's geysers. These geysers spew out superheated water that's hotter than boiling, and the mosses think that's just fine. Although mosses don't usually love the light, these thrive because they have zero competition.
Since they're rootless, they don't have to worry about the soil temperature as much as rooted plants.
To counteract the effects of exposure to so much sunlight, many of these mosses have developed adaptations to be able to live in the light. Some have clear-tipped leaves that reflect light, while others wrap their leaves around their stems to shade themselves from the sun.
Now we take our quest for the most extreme plants from the land to the sea. Seagrass usually grows close to the surface where there's abundant light, but Halophilia decipiens, also known as paddlegrass, takes things a little deeper.
Growing in beds as deep as 30 meters down where sunlight is harder to come by, this seagrass has come up with some unique adaptations to maximize its exposure. It has a high ratio of leaves to non-photosynthesizing parts, and those leaves are arranged in a way to prevent self-shading.
Self-shading might sound like a newfangled type of self-deprecation, but it's what happens when leaves overlap, blocking each other's light.
Paddlegrass also has the ability to quickly colonize a sandy bottom when light conditions are just right, allowing it to make a home where almost no other plant could.
What we can learn from extremophytes is that even when things get extreme, there's always a way to adapt, survive, and even to thrive.
This gigantic plant smells like fish guts. It hides its flowers under a thick leaf and only blooms for 0.01% of its life. It makes no evolutionary sense. It kind of seems to be the invention of a goth wizard, but in reality, it's the culmination of millions of years of evolution. Cover your nose and come on in. This is the corpse flower. Titan arum, or the corpse flower, has evolved to attract pollinators that we would rather not have around.
Most pollinators are attracted by sweet, energy-rich nectar, but some others are tricked into pollination.
Bee orchids catfish bees into an awkward date. Drake orchids mimic female wasps to get male wasps to land on them and chill. But other plants use flies as pollinators. The lives of flies are nasty, brutish, and short. By the time they can fly, their only purpose is to reproduce before dying a few days later.
Some species eat decomposing meat and lay their eggs in it so the larvae will have a ready source of nutrition when they hatch. These are the species the corpse plant targets.
The plant's job is to mimic rotten meat as closely as possible so that flies will land on it and pollinate it. Corpse flowers are amazing at this. From the point of view of an insect brain, they're indistinguishable. They smell like dead flesh. They're warm to the touch, and they're bright red and moist on the inside.
We wanted to see it and smell it up close, so we went to Gage Park in Hamilton, Ontario, where a giant corpse flower was in bloom.
And there it was, blooming in a greenhouse in the middle of the Canadian winter, a mere 15,000 kilometers away from its homeland of Sumatra. They only bloom for up to 48 hours every few years, so seeing one was super lucky. Every time one blooms at a greenhouse, thousands of people come to see it. Thousands more watch the bloom online. People cannot get enough of these smelly freaks. This one is called Kramer. It's about 1.5 meters tall, though some other corpse flowers can be twice as tall. The jury's still out on if this one is a good neighbor. Despite being called a corpse flower, it's not really a flower, but an inflorescence, a structure that contains multiple flowers. It's also not a corpse, but it sure smells like one.
It was as stinky as advertised, a mixture of fish guts and boiled cabbage.
Corpse flowers are really a structure of several flowers. The first European botanist who described it called it Amorphophallus titanum, which basically means Titanic amorphous phallus. They thought it looked like a man's body part.
The nickname Titan arum is a new invention and was given to them because the other nicknames for it were too scandalous for early 20th century nerds. David Attenborough is incorrectly said to have invented the name Titan arum for his 1995 documentary, The Private Life of Plants. But the first reference to the name is actually in a 1961 edition of American Horticultural Magazine.
It's not a hard name to get to, as arum is the common name for the plants in its family, and they happen to be the largest arum. The shaft itself doesn't have any flowers, but it's what attracts the flies. It's called a spadix, and it releases stinky chemicals that are irresistible to flesh flies and some beetles. It's also warm, which makes its perfume more volatile and helps sell the illusion of being real flesh.
When you touch it, it doesn't feel that warm, and that's because it's the same temperature as your hands. It's only when you touch the leaves that you can tell the difference in temperature.
The texture of the stalk is a bit like stale bread. At the base of the stalk, there are 2 rings of flowers. The upper ones are bright yellow male flowers. Insects have to squeeze in and out to get to the stinky bottom and get covered in pollen. Below the ring of pollen, there's a ring of bright red ovaries that take the pollen and make seeds. Once the insects reach the bottom, they look for crevices to lay their eggs. And in the struggle to find the most perfect, safest spot for their eggs, they unknowingly become pollinators. This is a crucial part of the process, and basically the whole point of the plant's evolutionary adaptations. But it's seldom seen because the flowers are covered by a leaf skirt called a spathe. Luckily, the greenhouse cut a hole in the leaf to collect pollen. There were no flesh flies, but we got to take a closer look at the ovaries.
Cutest ovaries I've ever seen. The Titan arum blooms when it's ready to pollinate, but the female part of the plant only becomes receptive the following day. This is a neat trick to prevent self-pollination. It gives insects enough time to go around and find other plants to pollinate.
After a day or 2 of bloom, the flower dies, and seeds are spread. If it germinates, the plant will start out as a corm, spending the first months of its life underground. Then, after several years, it will slowly grow into the majestic, stinky, cadaver-mimicking, insect-loving giant we all know and love. These beautiful mimics charm bugs with their scent. They're masters of disguise that can take the shape of hundreds of different animals. Prepare to take an incredulous look at the deceptive world of orchid mimicry. These flowers are pretty sus.
Orchids are one of the most beautiful and diverse plant families. There's almost 30,000 known species in the wild, and hundreds of new species are discovered every year.
Over the past 80 million years, they've colonized every continent except Antarctica, and have conquered almost every type of ecosystem. These seductive, deciduous herbs have been making people frisky for thousands of years. Great artists like Georgia O'Keeffe have explored their feminine beauty and likened them to some female body parts.
Even their name comes from the Greek word for testicle due to the shape of their pseudobulbs, which were once even thought to be a foolproof aphrodisiac.
part of their success comes from being able to extract energy from the fungi that grows around its roots. This has helped them thrive in low-light areas like in dense forests. Over time, this has led to a reduced photosynthetic capacity, meaning that several species can't grow without their mutualist fungi.
They've also increased their chances of success by colonizing trees.
70% of all orchids grow on trees, and 2/3 of all living plants that make trees their home are orchids. These species are amazing at absorbing nutrients from debris that accumulates on the tree. They also capture moisture from the air and tree bark and store it in their pseudobulb.
But by far, their greatest tool is their flowers. They're absolutely stunning and incredibly good at tricking animals into pollinating them.
Most flowers offer nectar as an incentive for insects to fly in and get covered in pollen. But about 1/3 of orchids have figured out that a little trickery goes a long way. The European bee orchid is one of the best examples of this. Their flowers emit the sex pheromones of female pollinator bees. Males are attracted to them and are invariably duped into landing on the flower's labellum, which is the same shape and color as the female bee. The males try to mate with the flower, thinking it's a bee, and in the struggle, they get covered in pollen. After a while, the male gets frustrated and leaves. He learns his lesson and stops visiting flowers with that scent.
The brilliance of the bee orchids is that they emit slightly different bee sex pheromones.
So the male will fly away and eventually get tricked again, this time by a different bee orchid. This ensures that the pollen doesn't go to a nearby bee orchid and prevents inbreeding.
Chemical and physical mimicry help orchids attract thousands of insect species.
The awesomely named Dracula orchids produce scents of rotten meat and cat pee to attract flies. Oncidium orchids resemble male bees, which incites actual male bees to try to fight them. And Dracaea orchids look and smell like female flower wasps.
Pheromones have been proven the more effective attractant, but mimicking animals certainly helps.
Orchids are bilaterally symmetrical, meaning their left side mirrors their right side. This is how most animals are, but it's rare in the plant kingdom.
So, with all these tools and all these species, orchids should be taking over the world, right? Wrong.
Their biomass is really low compared to other plants. Needing fungi to grow, being very slow growing, and needing specialized pollinators keeps their numbers fairly low.
More importantly, not being too common is an essential part of their strategy.
If there were too many tricksters, insects would be less likely to fall for it. Mimics need a healthy amount of honest signals to be effective.
Outside of the forest, orchids have found an even greater pollinator. Us. People have been struck with orchid delirium. Yep, that's the official term for orchid fever.
There are over 100,000 human-made hybrids, grown in greenhouses all over the world. Some of these hybrids are over 1,000 years old, and as a whole, the orchid trade is worth about $4 billion. Different orchid species have different needs, so if you get one, make sure to do some research on how to care for it.
Just try not to get one that attracts too many bees or wasps.
These trees love a home with a view and are famous for being the oldest individual plants in the world. With twisted wood that was carved by mountain winds, these ancient beauties are the epitome of aging gracefully. This is the bristlecone pine. Bristlecone pine actually refers to 3 species of the Pinaceae family, subsection Balfourianae. But we're going to focus on Pinus longeva, otherwise known as the Great Basin bristlecone pine.
And what a longeva pinus it is. These are the longest living non-clonal plants in the world.
The other species of the Balfourianae subsection are called Pinus aristata, or the Rocky Mountain bristlecone pine, and Pinus balfouriana, or foxtail pine. Comparing them to their sibling, the Great Basin bristlecone, these species are spring chickens. But while not nearly as long-living, the oldest known foxtail pine is still over 2,100, and the oldest Rocky Mountain bristlecone pine is almost 2,500 years old.
At the time this Rocky Mountain pine sprung from its seed, Confucius was still alive and imparting his teachings on the other side of the globe.
In terms of its habitat, Great Basin bristlecone pine loves an unobstructed view. They grow at heights above 1,700 meters in the Rocky Mountains and other mountain ranges in the southwestern U.S. These medium-sized trees grow between 5 and 16 meters tall and are distinct in their windswept appearance. Nothing gives you a unique style like thousands of years of mountain gales.
Imagine how your hair would look after a couple centuries in a convertible on the highway.
The young pine cones are closed and deep purple in color till they mature to a pale brown and open up. Each scale sports a fancy bristle, which, if you're paying attention, is where the bristlecone pine gets its name.
So just how old can the Great Basin bristlecone pine get? There are a number of mega mature trees still alive today after a couple centuries of treeing around.
A cluster of individuals on Wheeler Peak in Nevada, for example, are still standing at the ripe old age of 3,000. But that's nothing compared to some of the more famous individuals of this species. This is the same spot where Prometheus, the oldest tree at its time of death, was recorded. It was dated to be roughly 5,000 years old when it was chopped down for controversial research purposes in 1964.
The crown for the oldest living plant in the world was inherited by Methuselah, which grows in the Inyo National Forest in the Californian White Mountains, though he's still a bit of a youngling at 4,700 years of age.
But in 2012, another individual thought to be over 5,000 years old was discovered. Although it's been known to a small group of scientists for over a decade, this mysterious new player in the oldest tree game has yet to be given a grand nickname, and even its location is still a tightly held secret to prevent tourists from disturbing it or damaging it.
So now you know the freshest, hottest gossip in the world of dendrology. But don't let everyone know. We're trying to let this old guy enjoy his golden years in peace.
Talking about the oldest plant in the world isn't as straightforward as it may seem. As far as we know, the bristlecone pine family has the longest living individual plants on Earth. There are clonal plants, however, that come from much older stock.
Clonal plants reproduce asexually, meaning they don't need another plant to make more of themselves.
The offspring stays attached to the parent plant until it's established. One of the oldest examples of clonal plants is a group of Palmer's oak trees in the Jurupa Mountains in California. These bush-like trees are all clones of the original that sprung from a single acorn 13,000 years ago.
This colony of clones might be short, at just 1 meter tall, but she's thick, spanning over 2.5 kilometers across.
Older still, and possibly the oldest, at least as far as we've discovered, is a king's holly that resides in a top-secret location in Tasmania. It's said to be a clone of the original that lived at least 43,000 years ago.
That's long before our cousins, the Neanderthals, went extinct.
But when it comes to non-clonal individuals, no one has the bristlecone pine beat. Their age even enables them to be barometers of the state of the environment. One study showed that the growth of these trees accelerated over the last 50 years, more so than any other period of growth in the tree's 3,700-year history. Researchers found that this correlated to rising temperatures.
With their built-in knowledge of climate change, the bristlecone pine might not just be the oldest tree, but also the wisest.
It's something you may drink every single day. It goes by many names and comes in many forms, from a cup of joe or java to a latte, americano, espresso, or cold brew. It may help you wake up in the morning or give you energy when you need it most at night. This is the most consumed beverage in the world after water. This is the coffee plant. The coffea plant is said to have been discovered around 850 AD. Legend has it that in Ethiopia, a goat herder named Kaldi noticed his goats were acting in a strange way, even the oldest among them having lots of energy in the midday sun.
He then noticed they were eating red berries. These were coffee cherries, the red fleshy berries covering the green coffee beans, the seed of the coffee tree.
Kaldi introduced the berries to monks who were looking for a midday prayer pick-me-up. The monks boiled the beans, and the rest is history. Coffee spread from monastery to monastery, country to country, and continent to continent. Today, coffea plants are cultivated in tropical areas around the world.
The coffee tree is part of the subkingdom of plants known scientifically as the angiosperm. This means the plants reproduce via seeds kept in small box-like compartments known as the ovaries at the base of the plant.
There are over 100 species of coffee. The two best-known species are Coffea arabica and Coffea canephora, aka Robusta coffee, which together make up more than 90% of all coffee production around the world. Coffea arabica trees can reach up to 6 meters in height. They're perennial plants and live for about 10 years.
The delicious beans that we know and love are not actually beans at all. They're actually seeds that grow inside fruits colloquially known as cherries. But they're not actually cherries either. So whoever named these things, you did a pretty bad job.
The cherries have to be harvested at the perfect time to get the most delicious beans possible. Both immature and overripe fruits will produce defective, low-quality beans. And nobody wants defective, low-quality beans. Then the cherry's pulp is removed either by soaking it in water or by drying it out in the sun.
This reveals the green coffee bean. Fresh coffee beans are then roasted to develop the characteristic taste of coffee. But coffee is not just consumed because it tastes amazing. Most people drink coffee for its sweet, sweet caffeine. And since coffee is so popular, that makes caffeine the most widely consumed psychoactive agent in the world.
Caffeine can also be found in tea, pops, and energy drinks. But coffee is the #1 source of caffeine ingested by adults. People use caffeine to increase wakefulness and work productivity. This is because the molecular structure of caffeine allows it to bind to adenosine receptors, block adenosine production, and inhibit its effects. This will reduce fatigue, increase alertness, and improve vigilance during lengthy tasks.
In other words, caffeine blocks a chemical in our brain that makes us feel sleepy. It can help us go from sleep-deprived zombie to wakey wakey eggs and bakey, just like that.
In addition to increasing mental performance and vigilance, caffeine also prevents dopamine from getting reabsorbed into your system, leaving the feel-good chemical hanging around your brain for longer. This explains why a key behavioral effect of caffeine is reinforcement. Drinking coffee makes you want to drink more coffee, and why caffeine dependence and even addiction are so common these days.
Quitting coffee, like other addictive substances, is no joke. If you have a daily coffee routine and then suddenly quit cold turkey, you might experience withdrawal symptoms like headache, fatigue, and depressed mood. A dose of 10 to 14 grams of caffeine is thought to be fatal. But don't worry, the average cup of coffee brewed at home is just 92 milligrams of caffeine. So you'd really need to be chugging the coffee in order to have a fatal overdose. Think 150 cups in a short amount of time. So the next time you're cramming late night for an exam, keep it to 149.
All kidding aside, a limit of 400 milligrams of caffeine, or around 4 cups per day, are recommended for adults. Or if you really love the flavor, you can drink decaffeinated coffee, which is made from coffee beans that have been steamed and then rinsed repeatedly with a chemical solvent to flush away the caffeine.
And speaking of flushing, if you've ever wondered whether your daily cup of coffee makes you poop, you might be onto something.
Coffee is a natural laxative. Researchers still have a hard time putting their finger on exactly why coffee does this. One study shows that coffee relaxes the anal sphincter, while another shows it makes muscles in the large intestine contract. The same effect has been seen with decaffeinated coffee, so it's pretty unlikely that this happens just because of caffeine.
Another long-debated effect of coffee is that it counteracts the effects of alcohol. That is to say, some people believe that if you have a drunk friend who needs to sober up ASAP, you better get them some coffee.
Coffee definitely doesn't get rid of the alcohol in your system, and caffeine plus alcohol can actually make for a dangerous combination in your brain. Caffeine may perk you up and make you feel less intoxicated, but it has no effect on the metabolism of alcohol by your liver. So that means you might feel more alert, drink more alcohol, and end up even more impaired. Be warned, coffee is not in fact an antidote for intoxication.
A powerful little plant that's become a vital part of many of our lives.
When you're a superstar that is this iconic, you can afford to do things a little differently, like being a tree without actually being a tree, or being the toast of local legend and ceremony, or being pollinated not by mere bugs, but by lemurs. But being an icon can also sometimes prove to be deadly. This is the baobab tree. The first references to baobab in writings appeared in the travelogue of 14th century Arab scholar and explorer Ibn Battuta. Since then, and likely long before, humans have been absolutely fascinated by the baobab tree. These prehistoric plants actually predate us humans, and were even around before the supercontinent Pangaea split into the continents we know today, about 200 million years ago. That's one of the theories as to why you can find species of baobab not only in Madagascar, but also mainland Africa, Southwest Asia, and even Western Australia.
This theory, however, is still hotly debated, since the Australian variety, Adansonii gregorii, seems to be too genetically similar to the African species to have diverged from each other that long ago.
Some scientists theorize that the baobab seeds managed to float on over to Australia. Other scientists have suggested that baobab was brought to Australia by humans around 70,000 years ago, which would further reinforce the importance of these trees to humankind.
Today we're going to focus on the grandest of the baobabs, Adansonia grandidieri, the largest and most iconic of Madagascar's 6 species.
This queen of the baobab trees is commonly referred to as the giant baobab, or Grandidier's baobab, and is known locally as Renala, or Mother of the Forest, among many other names, some of which I will probably make up later in this episode. This long-living deciduous tree is a rare breed indeed, growing only in the tropical dry forests of southwest Madagascar.
This local hero plays an important role in culture and legends, as well as traditional ceremonies. Offerings are often left at the base of the tree for the spirits that are said to dwell within it.
In addition to its fruit and seeds being a valuable food source, the bark of the giant baobab is used for a range of purposes, from rope making to medicine to roofing. The outer bark is smooth, gray, and shiny, which helps it to retain water by reflecting light and heat. The cylindrical bulbous trunk can grow as wide as 3 meters across and as tall as 25 to 30 meters.
That's as wide as a moose is long, and as tall as 7 African elephants stacked on top of each other. Or, for a closer reference, as tall as me on a 28.5-meter ladder. You do the math.
All species of baobab are incredibly long-living, and they can survive for thousands of years. But how is it possible to harvest the bark of the baobab and not kill the tree? If this were a regular tree, whose bark protects it from the outside world, just like our skin does for us, without it, it wouldn't take very long for the vulnerable tree to die.
But this isn't a regular tree. This is the magnificent baobab tree, which really isn't a tree at all. It's a massive succulent.
These giant succulents have layer upon layer of fibrous, spongy wood. Harvesting the outer layers doesn't harm the tree, as long as it's done sustainably, and the tree will regenerate over time. Since it is a succulent, the trunk soaks up and stores massive amounts of water, and it's therefore able to produce delicious, nutrient-dense fruits in the dry season.
This is part of why you may have heard the baobab tree referred to as the tree of life, or as I like to call it, the tree of yummy, scrummy fruits.
The flowers of the giant baobab open around dusk and are large, white, and showy, with a pom-pom-like bundle of filaments at the center. The buds open quickly, in as little as a half an hour, and can be observed opening with the naked eye.
That is, if you can find your way up there to see it.
When it comes to pollinating the giant baobab, move over bees, here come the bats and nocturnal lemurs. Once fertilized, the flowers turn into a large fruit that has a spongy pulp and is full of kidney-shaped beans.
The word baobab is actually derived from Arabic, meaning something like many-seeded fruit, or as I like to call it, full of beans.
Giant baobab is certainly the most famous of the Madagascar baobabs, but fame isn't always all it's chalked up to be. Despite its high status, the giant baobab is the most heavily exploited of the species and is actually classified as endangered. In addition to being threatened by fire, it's also vulnerable to slash and burn farming, overgrazing, and overexploitation of its bark and fruit, which prevents the tree from regenerating. Its seeds have recently been marketed as a superfood, so the giant baobab may have yet more threats from foreign markets in the future.
Over 97% of the tropical dry forest habitat of Madagascar that the giant baobab calls home has already been lost. I call that a huge effing tragedy.
Baobab seeds need shade and water to germinate, which is why they require the shade of the forests they grow in, as well as the forest's understory to survive. When fires ravage the forest, or when it's clear-cut for farmland, it's that much harder for the next generation of baobab to get its start.
Efforts are being made, however, to save these iconic trees from the brink of extinction. With conservation, maybe we'll be lucky enough to see a resurgence of these magnificent giants in our lifetime.
Missionaries who described it in the 1700s claimed it serves for mystification and bewitchment. But the origins of this botanical beverage trace back much further, to the earliest indigenous inhabitants of the Amazon basin. Today, it's a trendy trip in mainstream drug culture, but also a promising key for unlocking new potential of the brain and mind. This is ayahuasca. Ayahuasca is an entheogen, which means it's a psychoactive substance that is used in a sacred or traditional context. Other examples of entheogens are peyote and magic mushrooms. Traditionally, ayahuasca is administered under the close care of a shaman and is used as a medicine to correct physical, emotional, and spiritual imbalances and encourage more harmonious relationships with others.
When the warriors of Amazon tribes returned from hunting, for example, they drank ayahuasca to process the aggression of the hunt and help them reintegrate into the community.
Through the experience of ingesting ayahuasca, the drinker is meant to connect deeply with their inner self and gain direct access to the spiritual world. Ayahuasca, after all, is a Quechua word that can be loosely translated to vine of the soul or vine of the spirits.
Ayahuasca itself isn't technically a single plant. It's a psychotropic tea made of 2 plants, the vine, Banisteriopsis caapi, and the shrub, Psychotria viridis. Other plants can be added, but these two are the main attractions. Let's break down each of these plants individually.
First up is Banisteriopsis caapi, sometimes called yage or just plain caapi. This plant is a liana, a giant woody-stemmed vine native to the Amazon and Orinoco river basins in South America. It's one of about 16,000 members of the Malpighiales order, one of the largest orders of flowering plants. This evergreen climber can reach up to 30 meters long.
That's as long as the longest blue whale ever recorded.
There's some speculation that Amazonian shamans first became aware of the powerful effects of Banisteriopsis caapi when they observed jaguars tripping bippity-boppity-boos after gnawing on these vines.
It's the jungle equivalent of catnip, but for big old cats.
Next up is Psychotria viridis. Commonly called chacruna, this plant is a flowering shrub that's part of Rubiaceae, otherwise known as the coffee family. This woody plant is no shrimpy shrub. It can grow 5 meters tall and 2 meters wide. In addition to being a key ingredient in ayahuasca, the Machigenga people also use the juice of its leaf as eye drops to treat migraines.
It burns like hell when you first drop it in your eyes, but it gives you access to heightened vision to see with understanding, according to the Andoque tribe of Colombia.
Ayahuasca is made by a shaman by washing pieces of caapi bark, pounding them with a wooden mallet, and layering them with washed leaves of Psychotria viridis in a large pot. The pot is filled with water to cover the plant matter and boiled for at least 8 hours to concentrate it.
So what happens when someone takes ayahuasca? In Spanish, the effect is referred to as mareación, which means dizziness. The drinker may experience visual hallucinations, a sensation of flying, and a sense of euphoria.
Taking ayahuasca over a long period, they may also see their friends and family, both dead and alive, and feel that they can communicate with them. Along with the more pleasant effects usually also come clumsiness, vomiting, and diarrhea, and sometimes also fear, paranoia, and aggression.
To most, puking and pooping your pants may not seem like a fun trip, but for some cultures, the purgative properties of ayahuasca are a welcome part of the experience. Followers of the Santo Daime religion view the puke and the poop that come out as repressed emotions leaving the body.
Caapi and Psychotria viridis grow in the same regions of South America and are seemingly made for each other. The chemicals in these two ayahuasca plants work in perfect harmony to enable the drinker to have a deep, psychotropic experience. The 3 main Harmala alkaloids found in caapi, harmine, tetrahydroharmine, and harmaline, produce psychoactive effects on their own, but also function as monoamine oxidase inhibitors. Monoamine oxidase is an enzyme that plays a role in removing the neurotransmitters norepinephrine, serotonin, and dopamine from the brain.
You might know these as happy hormones. The inhibitors in ayahuasca block the monoamine oxidase from removing happy hormones, making more available in the brain.
Psychotria viridis contains a powerful hallucinogen called N,N-dimethyltryptamine, or DMT for short. When ingested alone, it's orally inactive, meaning this chemical doesn't create any psychedelic effect. That's because it's broken down by the monoamine oxidase in the liver and gastrointestinal tract before it crosses the blood-brain barrier.
But add in some monoamine oxidase inhibitors from the caapi, and DMT can enter the central nervous system, giving the drinker an intense and long-lasting psychedelic experience.
Ayahuasca is considered a master plant, or teacher plant, which are plants that possess strong curative and spiritual powers. Other examples of teacher plants in Amazonian indigenous culture are Brunfelsia grandiflora, a flowering shrub of the nightshade family known as Shirrique sanango, Mansoa alliaceae, also known as ajo sasha, or garlic vine, due to its pungent garlicky scent, and Calliandra angustifolia, known as babinzana, or the heart opener.
Ayahuasca is known as the teacher of teachers, and is said to be the voice of wisdom of all the teacher plants.
Worldwide, non-traditional interest in ayahuasca has spiked in recent decades. But because of this mainstream interest, ayahuasca is currently being investigated for use in conventional medicine. It shows promise in a number of areas, including protecting and restoring brain cells and treating a host of psychological disorders, like anxiety, depression, PTSD, and addiction. The list of potential benefits is as long as this drink's history as a traditional medicine.
Ask any Amazonian shaman, and they'll tell you the results are already in about the benefits of ayahuasca. It's a classic case of mainstream healthcare investigating a medicine that's already been used by indigenous healers for centuries.
While its name seems more like it belongs in an episode of Game of Thrones, this mythical-looking tree is indeed of this realm. The fandom that surrounds it, however, certainly rivals that of any blockbuster fantasy series. That's because when you cut it, it oozes blood-red sap that has the power to heal. This is the Dragon Blood Tree.
Today we're talking about a tree that has its place among myth and legend, the Dragon Blood Tree. Sometimes also referred to as the Socotra dragon tree, it's earned its name thanks to the ruby red sap that it bleeds.
Dracaena cinnabari is a member of the dragon tree genus, which includes over 120 trees and succulent shrubs, spread mostly across Africa, Southern Asia, and Northern Australia. This exclusive species, however, only grows high in the mountains and on the plateaus of a string of tiny islands called the Socotra Archipelago.
And the dragonblood tree is hands down the most iconic resident.
Located in the Indian Ocean, about 340 kilometers southeast of Yemen, the Socotra Archipelago is made up of just 4 islands and 2 rocky islets, which researchers believe have been isolated from the mainland for around 15 to 18 million years.
Because of this isolation, Socotra has evolved some seriously unique flora and fauna, and has been dubbed the Galapagos of the Indian Ocean. 37% of its 825 plant species don't occur anywhere else on Earth.
Other than the dragonblood tree, examples of plant species endemic to Socotra include Dendrocysaios socotranus, a member of the gourd family, and the Socotran pomegranate Punica protopunica, which is the only other species in the pomegranate genus. There's also Socotrine aloe, the incense tree family member Boswellia socotrana, and the giant succulent Dorstenia gigas, just to name a few.
And that's just the flora. Most of this archipelago's fauna is also totally unique. 90% of its reptiles and 95% of its snails, for example, can't be found anywhere else in the world.
The name Socotra originates from Sanskrit, meaning island abode of bliss. And to look at the haven of biodiversity you'll find here, nature lovers will definitely find themselves in their special kind of heaven. Dragonblood trees, weirdly, are part of the asparagus family. Many common house and garden plants are part of this family, including spider and snake plants.
But unlike asparagus, whose only superpower is to make your pee stink, dragonblood trees ooze bright red resin that has the super ability to heal.
In addition to using the sap as a pigment for dyeing, painting, and in spiritual ceremonies, dragonblood tree resin has been used in traditional medicine for thousands of years, with records of its application ranging from ancient Greece to China. It was usually used to treat pain, as well as ailments of the skin, eyes, teeth, and gastrointestinal tract.
Recent studies have investigated dragonblood sap and found that it's even more powerful than we originally thought. In addition to being an antiviral, antimicrobial, anti-inflammatory, pain reliever, and an antioxidant, it also contains properties that may heal wounds, combat diarrhea, ulcers, and tumors, and improve circulation and immune function. One study found it to be so effective as an antimicrobial that it could even be considered as a viable food preservative.
Dragonblood trees are extremely slow growing, but can eventually reach heights of 10 meters and live to be 650 years old. They have wide umbrella-like canopies that kind of look like the giant tree version of an oyster mushroom.
While it may seem like a fluke of nature, its kooky appearance actually evolved for good reason. Dragonblood trees are xenomorphs. Sorry, xeromorphs, meaning that they've adapted characteristics that protect them from excessive water loss, something they need real bad in their extra arid environment.
First off, they have smooth, light gray bark, which helps to deflect sunlight. This serves much the same purpose as the bark of the famous giant Madagascar succulent, the baobab tree.
Be sure to check out our video to learn all about those bubble letter lookalikes.
The hard leaves of the dragonblood tree are extra long and narrow, and are adapted to prevent water loss during long periods of heat and dryness. These specialized leaves are able to capture the frequent mists that pass through their mountainous habitat. The mist condenses into water droplets on the tough, waxy leaves and drips down onto the soil below. The super dense canopy above prevents these precious droplets from evaporating in the sun before the tree's roots can absorb them.
But even the best evolved protections can't save this plant from modern threats, like overgrazing, habitat loss, overexploitation of resin, and climate change.
Because they grow so slowly, dragonblood trees are extremely vulnerable to grazing animals. Unregulated overharvesting of the sap has also caused numbers to dwindle.
Conservation efforts, however, are ongoing to ensure these incredible dragons don't truly become things of myth and legend.
This passive carnivorous plant waits patiently with its specially evolved glue trap leaves for prey to come its way. But it doesn't just digest the ants and other insects that are unlucky enough to tread on its leaves. This carnivore is also a secret omnivore. This is the butterwort. Butterwort is the common name for the carnivorous plants in the genus Pinguicula. which is one of 3 genera in the Lentibulariaceae family. We already covered one of the others, Utricularia, otherwise known as bladderwort. They're aquatic, super sucker, flesh-eating cousins.
Like most carnivorous plants, butterwort lives in nutrient-poor environments and rely on catching live prey to supply themselves with everything they need to thrive.
There are around 80 species of butterwort, and they live throughout wetlands in the northern hemisphere and Central and South America, all the way up to the Arctic Circle.
As far as carnivorous monsters go, these flesh eaters are pretty teeny tiny, with the largest species, Pinguicula gigantea, only reaching widths of about 12 inches. Gigantea indeed.
Most butterwort species have a flat rosette of broad, oval-shaped leaves around the base, with a few species sporting upright leaves. Some can gently bend their leaves in response to capturing a snack, while others remain completely still.
Help me! The Venus flytrap, with its mechanical enclosure, definitely has to grind harder for its meals.
Each leaf of the butterwort is covered in 2 kinds of specialized glands. The stalked glands produce super sticky, gluey mucilage to snare the prey, while the sessile glands, the ones that are directly on the surface of the leaf, pump out digestive enzymes to break down the prey once it's stuck to this superfine glue trap. Larger insects can easily escape the tiny mucilage glands, so the main prey of the butterwort is smaller insects like gnats, aphids, and ants. And the more their prey moves, the more mucilage the plant produces.
It's like the quicksand of the plant world. Every movement brings you closer to death.
Even though the butterwort is lights out for ants and other small arthropods, they rely on larger insects like bees and flies to pollinate their beautiful flowers. These gorgeous blooms come in violet, red, pink, blue, and white, making butterwort a stunning addition to any carnivorous plant collection.
Active trappers, like sundew and Venus flytrap, which we've also done episodes on, rely on both mechanical and chemical signals to get to the digesting.
Passive carnivorous plants, like butterworts, rely solely on chemical stimuli to start breaking down their prey. The chemicals that are found in the exoskeletons of any trapped arthropods let the butterwort know it's go time.
One study suggests it's not just arthropods that provide butterworts with their nosh. These plants are actually mixotrophs, getting energy and carbon from a cocktail of sources.
Butterworts were found to contain the digestive enzyme alpha amylase, also found in humans and other mammals, which breaks down starches found in plant material. The alpha amylase they secrete suggests they also break down and digest the plant matter that lands on their flat leaves, making butterworts the omnivores of the carnivorous plant world.
Butterworts are steak and potato kind of plants.
Known as pings to plant nerds around the world, these species are a favorite of carnivorous plant lovers. And happily, they're relatively easy to keep and propagate. If you're adding butterwort to your collection, be sure to read about care for your specific species. They have different needs depending on if they're warm temperate, cool temperate, or tropical.
And don't forget to show them off to your friends as your only omnivorous plant.
This member of the carrot family is anything but good for the eyes, with reports of its sap causing temporary or even permanent blindness. Its scientific name references its demigod-like size and strength. This is definitely one plant you don't want to tangle with. This is the giant hogweed.
Giant hogweed is native to the Caucasus Mountains of Georgia, the country, not the state, as well as Azerbaijan and southern Russia, where it can be found in meadows, clearings, around the edges of forests, and on or near riverbanks. It can even be found on the seashore and doesn't mind the salt spray one mote.
Giant hogweed is a member of the Apiaceae family. This huge aromatic family of about 3,700 species, spread over 700 genera, has some high-profile members that you might have in your kitchen right now. Celery, carrots, dill, fennel, coriander, cumin, and caraway, just to name a few.
But just like the Skywalkers, the Apiaceae family also has a dark side.
Its more infamous members include a bunch of poisonous species, like poison hemlock, as well as some phototoxic members, like giant hogweed.
If you get the sap of the giant hogweed on your skin, it can make it wildly sensitive to sunlight, making you an itchier version of Dracula.
This double whammy of sap plus sun is called photodermatitis. Within 24 to 48 hours, you'll break out in nasty, weepy rashes and blisters that can even cause permanent scarring or discoloration. The sap is most toxic when the plant is flowering, but it's probably best to avoid this plant anytime. If you do tangle with the hogweed, try to keep the sap-slathered skin out of the sun.
If you get the sap in your eye, it can cause temporary or possibly permanent blindness. Even though it's been shown that carrots don't specifically improve eye health, I'm sure they'd still disown giant hogweed if they could.
Giant hogweed is a monocarpic perennial, meaning it flowers only once after being in a vegetative state for a long period of time. After it flowers, it dies.
The most famous monocarpic perennial is probably bamboo, which can stay in its vegetative state for up to 100 years.
It will then go through a mass flowering event, a phenomenon called gregarious flowering, where all the bamboo plants flower at once before dying.
Giant hogweed doesn't get quite that elderly, but it will live between 2 and 12 years before it finally flowers and gives up the ghost.
You know what they say about big plants? Big flowers. Giant hogweed flowers, which are white or occasionally pink, are beautiful and massive, stretching up to 80 centimeters across. After they go to seed, each plant has tens of thousands of winged seeds that are taken away by the wind. Most plants want to send their seedlings far away, so they don't have to compete for the same light and resources. A study in Scotland showed, however, that 60 to 90% of the seeds landed within 13 meters of the parent.
So giant hogweed seeds take to the water.
Giant hogweed plants that are on or near rivers can use the currents to carry their seeds as far away from the parent plant as possible. These seeds can float for up to 2 days without sinking.
But even if they don't go far, seeds can stay viable in the soil for up to 7 years. So seedlings could theoretically repopulate an area long after their parent is dead and gone.
Giant hogweed can be found all over North America, where it's identified as an invasive, non-native species. And this giant likes to rove, with its spread described as slow but steady.
Let's just hope it doesn't pull a tortoise and win the race.
Giant hogweed has existed on the North American continent since at least 1917, and was likely either introduced as an ornamental plant or accidentally in seeds from imported foods.
North America isn't the only place where giant hogweed has made itself a little too comfortable.
In the UK, it was planted in Kew Gardens in 1817, with reports that it had escaped to surrounding areas by 1828. In 1862, it was planted in today's Czech Republic, and by 1877, it was starting to invade. It's now spread all over Western Europe, Great Britain, and Ireland, as well as the US and Canada.
Giant hogweed is difficult to eradicate, and not just because of the blisteringly toxic sap. This giant is like the final boss in a video game.
Researchers cut some specimen 4 times a year for 2 years, and they didn't even die. Cutting the large taproot half a foot down below the soil is the only way to reliably kill this invader.
Given its Herculean scientific moniker, its strength and stamina really make you wonder if this plant isn't a demigod after all.
Waxy white, as translucent as a ghost, and covered in scales. This paranormal parasite looks as ghastly as it acts, as it saps the nutrients from unsuspecting mushrooms. It doesn't need the light, so it's often found in the deep, dark woods with other fairy tale monsters. This is the ghost plant. Ghost plant's scientific name, Monotropa uniflora, is a real mishmash of classical languages. Monotropa from the Greek for one turn, and uniflora from the Latin for one flowered. One turn, one flowered basically describes the fact that each stem only has a single odorless flower.
But what the scientific name blatantly ignores is that this plant is spooky to the armpits. How do you say creepy as hell in Latin?
Let's start with its looks. This plant is a ghostly translucent white, or sometimes pink, that develops black spots as it ages. It's a perennial, ranging in height from 10 to 30 centimeters and commonly grows in clusters.
Dare to venture out where it lives and pick a bunch, and it'll turn from shimmering white to goth black right before your very eyes.
Because it's so delicate and looks like frozen jelly, the ghost plant is sometimes also called the ice plant, because it seemingly melts away when picked up and handled.
So if you're hoping for a snowy white bouquet of ghost plants to haunt your credenza, sorry to disappoint.
The ghost plant's stem is covered in scaly modified leaves called bracts. If you think you've never heard of a bract before, you may know them better than you realize. You might even decorate your home with bracts every December.
The flowers of a poinsettia are actually a bunch of bracts that are more fabulous than the true flowers themselves.
The flower of the ghost plant nods downward until it's pollinated by an insect, at which point it points upright. Bumblebees are the typical pollinators, and they get a sweet nectar and some yummy pollen as a reward for their visit. After it blooms, it goes dark, and the flower is replaced with a seed capsule full of tiny, wind-dispersed seeds. The root system of the ghost plant is brittle and fleshy.
The roots are also apparently very tasty to grizzly bears, who've been seen digging them up for a nice snack.
The ghost plant is in the Ericaceae family, otherwise known as heaths or heathers, depending on your preference. Famous members of this family of over 4,000 include blueberries and cranberries. While it may be related to your favorite yogurt toppings, the pale color, downturned flower, and firm, fleshy texture of the ghost plant often lead people to falsely assume that this plant is a mushroom.
While not a fungus itself, fungi do play a key role in how ghost plants get their nutrients. So the connection with fungus is not that far-flungus.
Which brings us to the creepy as hell way it gets its nutrients. The ghost plant is one of 3,000 heterotrophic plants, which need to rustle up their nutrients from outside sources.
And heterotrophs do just that, but in very uncanny ways.
Insectivorous plants, like Venus flytraps, butterwort, sundew, and pitcher plants, which we've talked about on the channel, catch and digest bugs for nutrients. Parasitic plants, like dodder, sap their nutrients from a host plant. Like dodder, the ghost plant is a parasite, and it lacks the chlorophyll necessary to make its own food from sunlight. The ghost plant was once thought to be a saprophyte, a plant or fungi that eats dead or decaying matter. But new research has found that instead of feasting on the dead,
ghost plants take a very vampiric approach, sucking the nutrients from unsuspecting fungi.
These are mycorrhizal fungi that live around the bases of trees in the deep, dark woods where ghost plants are found. In fact, almost all terrestrial plants have root-infecting mycorrhizal fungi. They live in what's called mutualistic symbiosis. The plant gives the fungi nutrients through its roots, and in turn, the fungi enable the plant to increase its nutrient and water absorption capabilities.
The relationship between fungi and ghost plants, however, is anything but mutual.
The ghost plant catfishes the fungi, tricking it into thinking it's entering another legit symbiosis. But this relationship is a toxic one, since the ghost plant doesn't give anything back. It just siphons off the fungi's hard-won nutrients and energy, like the parasite it is.
If only ghost plants were as nice to fungi as they are to bumblebees.
So the tree does the photosynthesizing, the fungi absorbs the nutrients from the tree's roots, and the ghost plant steals them from the fungi.
And they do it all without lifting a single bract.
Ghost plants are so delicate that propagating them at home is next to impossible. They rely entirely on a specific climate, dark and moist conditions, and, of course, the tenuous love triangle between the tree and its fungus.
No matter how many times you criticize it for wearing white after Labor Day, you'll never be able to throw enough shade at this spooky parasite to make it thrive outside the forest.
This plant is so large, you might mistake it for a tree. But don't be fooled by its impressive stature. This delicious delight is just the largest of the herbaceous flowering plants. There's a good chance you even have this perfect addition to any kitchen on your countertop right now. This is the banana. Banana is the common name for the herbaceous plants in the Musaceae family. The bananas and plantains that we know and love today are part of the Musa genus. While their sizes vary, cultivated varieties can reach up to 23 feet tall, which is why they're often mistakenly referred to as banana trees.
This variety that I have here is called a superdwarf and only reaches about 4 feet tall. This one has never given me any fruit though, because they require such high humidity to flower. And contrary to popular belief, I do not live in a greenhouse.
The banana is one of the oldest cultivated plants, believed to have been first domesticated in Southeast Asia. Bananas today are grown mainly in tropical and subtropical regions of Africa, Asia, Melanesia, the Americas, and the Pacific.
A bunch of bananas is called a hand, and the individual fruits are called fingers. That kind of makes mashing, chopping, and blending them feel a little gruesome. Am I right?
Did you know bananas are actually berries? In a botanical sense, most of the fruits that we call berries, including strawberries, raspberries, aren't really berries at all. These come from a single flower with more than one ovary, the female part of the plant that turns into the fruit. And they're technically aggregate fruits.
Real deal berries come from one flower with one single ovary that has multiple seeds. That includes the star of today's show, the banana.
These appealing fruits are one of the most important crops produced in the world today and have been a staple of our diets since the beginning of recorded history.
The big player, Cavendish, is the one you're probably used to eating from the grocery store.
But there are other varieties, like the blue Java, which tastes like ice cream thanks to its creamy texture and vanilla flavor. Sweet and soft red bananas have reddish purple skin and pinkish fruit with notes of raspberry. And of course, there's plantains, sometimes called cooking bananas, which are starchier and less sweet, making them a staple in kitchens across West and Central Africa, the Caribbean, and Central and South America.
It's estimated that 100 billion bananas are eaten every year. If you ate one banana per second, it would take you almost 3,170 years to eat 100 billion bananas. That's a lot.
With hundreds and hundreds of fully domesticated varieties in existence, you'd think we'd have a pretty good handle on these yummy yellow fellows.
The truth is, scientists are still peeling back the mysterious veil that surrounds the banana and its domestication.
Today's banana varieties are parthenocarpic, meaning that they're developed without fertilization. Other examples of parthenocarpic fruits are grapes, oranges, pineapples, and grapefruit. After the banana plant flowers and fruits, it's cut down because each stalk can only produce one bunch. Side shoots, known as suckers, appear at the base of the main stalk, which can be removed and replanted. It's estimated that up to 99% of the bananas we eat today are Cavendish. Because of the way they're propagated, all Cavendish bananas and all bananas that we eat are clones of each other, making them genetically identical. They've been artificially selected for fruit size and deliciousness. This inbreeding has made them unable to reproduce sexually or without the help of humans. If we were to disappear from the earth, this type of banana would die out soon after.
If a disease infects and kills one banana, it has the power to wipe out the entire cultivar.
In fact, the last big variety, known as Gros Michel or Big Mike, was swept in the 1950s by a fungus known as Panama disease, causing the world's banana producers to switch to the more disease-resistant Cavendish variety.
But Cavendish is also in danger. Some banana scientists believe it's only a matter of time before a disease comes to claim the Cavendish too.
While naturally resistant to the strain of fungus that decimated Big Mike, Cavendish isn't immune to everything. Right now, there's a new fungus in town called TR4 that is already damaging Asian crops and spreading quickly.
But have no fear, science is here. Scientists are already cooking up new, more disease-resistant varieties to make sure we don't have a bleak, banana-less future.
In the meantime, if you live far from banana-producing places, to ensure your banana gets to you in perfect condition, it will likely be harvested green and ripened at its final destination with ethylene gas. Ethylene is a natural byproduct of ripening fruits. Once exposed to the gas, the bananas are still green, but their ripening process has now been triggered. When they start to turn vaguely yellow, they're ready to ship to your local grocer.
All this gas talk, and I didn't let a single fart joke rip.
Bananas are used for much more than just making delicious bread. The whole plant can be used for a variety of purposes, like mulch, animal fodder, fuel, weaving, rope making, building materials, and even medicinal purposes.
Lots of plants can make you vomit if you eat them, but this one can make you puke just by touching it.
The hot electric acid pain that this plant's venom delivers on contact is as bad as a bullet ant sting, and can send you into blinding agony for days, weeks, months, or even years.
Why did this plant evolve to cause such intense agony? This is the Gimpy Gimpy.
It may look cute with its plushy, heart-shaped leaves. It may sound cute with its adorable moniker, but the dark nickname of the Gimpy Gimpy reveals its true character. You don't get called the suicide plant for nothing. One touch, and it may make you consider ending your life, and you wouldn't be the first.
Gimpy Gimpy, otherwise known as Dendrocnide moride, is a member of Urticaceae, or the nettle family.
Being part of this prickly lineage may have you assuming that this plant isn't a fun one to tangle with. But even amongst its brethren, no plant on this planet hurts more than Gimpy Gimpy.
The suicide plant is, somewhat unsurprisingly, native to Australia. Specifically, it's most at home in the tropical rainforest of Queensland, though its range extends to the northern tip of New South Wales. It mostly lives in rainforest clearings, along creek lines and small tracks, basically anywhere it can soak up a little sun between the dense forest canopy.
We already know that Australia hosts some of the world's ouchiest animals.
Oh no! Yeah!
Come here, Bonnie.
You what?
You're not filming, are you, you big freak? Let it go, dogs, let's go. The other dog's coming. Yeah, just buzz that dog, man.
But now we can also add the most excruciating plant to that list. Anecdotal accounts say that gimpy venom is on par with bullet ant stings, a 4 on the Schmidt Pain Index, which is the highest possible pain rating for insect stings. The only difference between the two being that a bullet ant sting stops hurting after 24 hours, unlike gimpy, which can last for years. Here are several completely different Australians giving graphic descriptions of the pain of gimpy stings.
The worst kind of pain you can imagine, mate. Mate, it was like being burned with hot acid and electrocuted at the same time. The pain was almost unbearable. I couldn't walk or sleep. Mate. I've had 4 kids, 3 cesareans, 1 natural childbirth. None of them came close. The pain was beyond unbearable. The body gets to a pain threshold, and then I just start vomiting. Mate.
Creating this world of pain takes a very precise toxin delivery system. The fine fuzz that covers the leaves, stems, and berries, giving them their plush look, are actually densely packed hairs that are made of silicone and structured like a hypodermic needle. While they seem to resemble jellyfish nematocytes, they're actually nothing alike.
Each gimpy hair is filled with very potent neurotoxins, much like a spider or cone snail's venom, which arguably makes this potentially the world's only venomous plant. A gimpy's neurotoxins are appropriately named gimpytides. These neurotoxins wreak havoc on nerve tissue, which is how the gimpy gets such a huge reaction out of its victims.
And this neurotoxin has a serious shelf life. Dried specimens of gimpy that were collected more than a century ago still have the ability to cause excruciating pain.
On a wild side note, recent research has determined that gimpytides may permanently change the way nerve cells work. Unlocking how gimpytides interact with nerve cells has researchers studying them for their potential as a brand new kind of pain reliever. Leading to a drug that doesn't cause dependency like opioid-based painkillers do, may just be gimpy's only redeeming quality.
All right, back to the stinging. Once contact with skin is made with these hypodermic needle hairs, the tips break off, injecting the pain juice. The hairs are tiny and basically invisible, so they are impossible to pull out individually. Often, the skin will close around the hairs, embedding them forever.
There is no antidote for a gimpy sting. The current recommended treatment is not to rub. For the love of all things good, never rub. And splash the area in diluted hydrochloric acid, which breaks down the peptide coating of the hairs. Then, apply wax strips to the area and try to rip out as many gimpy hairs as you can. You know it's bad when the treatment is pouring acid on yourself and giving yourself an emergency Brazilian.
The pain of touching gimpy is instantaneous and peaks at about 20 to 30 minutes after contact. In bad cases, your lymph nodes, which usually protect your body from infection, will be sent into hyperdrive. Within 20 minutes, your lymph nodes will swell so much they'll throb in agony for hours, making you wonder which pain is worse.
And because the hairs are made of silicone, a substance the body can't break down, they can remain in place, ready to shake loose new waves of painful neurotoxins for years after contact. But it's not just contact that will cause you trouble.
Just standing near the plant for too long can cause a bad case of painful and relentless sneezing. Keep hanging around and this will morph into a wicked nosebleed. That's because the plant is constantly shedding these toxin-filled hairs, which float invisibly around the plant like clouds of misery.
Instinctively, after a sting like this, you'd probably reach for some water to wash the area. But this is when the Gimpy Gimpy's sadistic side really comes out. Water on the stung area actually activates the toxins for up to years afterwards. It's the worst kind of flashback.
Despite its intensity, the pain caused by Gimpy Gimpy is truly unique in that it isn't representative of any actual damage, and its neurotoxins are not actually lethal. While a poisonous snake bite, for example, hurts like crazy, the venom will also cause serious damage to the body.
So although it's likely the worst pain you'll ever experience, you'll actually be totally fine. Someday. Probably.
While the stings of the Gimpy Gimpy are not lethal per se, the suicide plant has caused at least one rumored death. A serviceman in World War II is rumored to have killed himself after using the leaves as toilet paper. Another had to be tied to a hospital bed for 3 weeks because he went, quote, mad as a cut snake after falling into a Gimpy Gimpy during military training.
Even non-native animals, like dogs and horses, aren't immune to the Gimpy Gimpy's excruciation situation.
One of the first reports of Gimpy Gimpy from 1866 details a road surveyor's horse, which, quote, was stung, got mad, and died within 2 hours.
Interestingly, many native mammals, insects, and birds do not seem to be affected by the Gimpy Gimpy.
Some mantises and spiders make the deadly leaves of the Gimpy Gimpy their home, using the venomous plant to hide out from predators, similar to how clownfish have adapted to live in the highly venomous sea anemones. The caterpillar of the Jezebel butterfly, which itself is covered in spikes, can even eat the similarly spike-covered plant, as they've evolved to be immune to the Gimpy Gimpy's venom. Some birds have evolved to be able to eat the deadly plant's hair-covered, raspberry-like fruit, and they distribute the seeds throughout the rainforest. The holes that are often seen chewed in the leaves are from nocturnal leaf-eating beetles, along with many other leaf munchers and sapsucker insects.
But the greatest fan of this questionable snack is the most hardcore animal of them all, the red-legged patamelon.
This tiny kangaroo-like marsupial has been known to strip entire Gimpy Gimpys of their leaves in just one night.
Maybe the real key to unlocking the next great painkiller is to find out what superpowers the red-legged patamelon has and to replicate that. Until then, it's best to steer very clear of the Gimpy Gimpy.
This infamous plant is as sacred as it is dangerous, and not just to humans, but habitats too. From New Zealand to Sweden and everywhere in between, this plant is at the heart of an $850 billion industry that kills 8 million people a year. This is tobacco. Nicotiana tabacum is an herbaceous annual that grows 1 to 2 meters tall, is covered in hairs, and sports white, pink, or reddish flowers.
Tobacco is part of Solanaceae, otherwise known as the nightshade family. Like most families, it's a complex one, full of characters that will either nicely nourish you or massively mess you up.
Toxic members include belladonna, aka deadly nightshade, mandrake, also known as Satan's apple, and jimsonweed, also known as devil's snare. On the more nutritious side of the family, there are wonderfully delicious members like tomatoes, potatoes, and peppers.
Who can disagree that every family has a few belladonnas among the potatoes?
Tobacco thrives in an impressively large range of habitats, from forests to savannas to wetlands to mountains and more. It can also tolerate many different types of soil, from light and sandy to medium and loamy to heavy clay. Tobacco also says pfft to pH levels, feeling at home in everything from acidic to basic soils. Volcanic soil is the most highly prized for growing premium tobacco, and plantations can be found around active volcanoes.
With tobacco planted all around them, it's no wonder volcanoes smoke. Am I right?
Nicotiana tabacum is thought to have originated in South and Central America, perhaps as far north as Mexico, but its origins are hard to trace because of its early widespread use. Based on what we know, it's thought that tobacco was domesticated in Central America over 3,000 years ago. Its cultivation may have predated or even laid the groundwork for the cultivation of other food crops, like maize.
By the time Europeans invaded the Americas, tobacco already had huge cultural, medical, and spiritual significance for many indigenous peoples across North and South America.
For many indigenous cultures, tobacco is considered a highly sacred, healing plant for body and spirit, used for ritual, ceremony, and prayer. Traditional tobacco can be burned, like in smudging ceremonies, or the dried leaves can, for example, be worn or hung in the home for protection. Tobacco is considered a traditional gift for elders and knowledge keepers in North American First Nations and Métis communities.
For many indigenous peoples, traditional tobacco deserves the highest respect, and it's not to be confused with the way we use commercial tobacco today.
Tobacco reproduces asexually and grows quickly. Combined with its tolerance of many habitats and soil types and its cultivation in non-native regions, tobacco is considered an invasive species. Wherever it's cultivated, it manages to escape and spread. It is invasive in Cuba, Asia, Europe, and parts of the Pacific. The publication, The Global Compendium of Weeds, had some pretty choice words for this plant, including casual alien, garden thug, and noxious weed.
That compendium throws more shade at this nightshade than a chestnut tree.
In addition to Nicotiana tabacum, Nicotiana rustica, sometimes called Aztec tobacco, wild tobacco, or strong tobacco, is another smokable species in the same genus native to South American rainforests. It's also 3 times as strong as Virginian tobacco and, by all accounts, tastes pretty bad, so it's not for everyone. The other species in the Nicotiana genus are called flowering tobaccos and are used as ornamental plants.
Nicotiana rustica is so much more potent than Nicotiana tabacum that in addition to being snorted, smoked, and chewed, it's also used as a powerful pesticide and topically to treat swelling, skin diseases, and scorpion stings.
We can't talk about tobacco without also mentioning nicotine, the addictive alkaloid contained in tobacco that has made it such a booming industry. While nicotine itself doesn't cause cancer, recent studies have shown that nicotine can affect critical steps in the development of cancer. But there are carcinogenic compounds in tobacco. For example, polycyclic hydrocarbons are a class of chemicals that form naturally from burning crude oil, coal, gasoline, and tobacco. There are also nitrosamines, which form when tobacco leaves are aged or processed. These 2 types of compound are the root of most cancer diseases caused by tobacco.
But even if it doesn't cause cancer itself, nicotine is what turns people into repeat customers. 1.3 billion of them around the world, in fact.
The World Health Organization calls tobacco use one of the biggest public health threats the world has ever faced, killing about 8 million people globally a year. It's even proven to contribute to poverty, since money meant for basic needs like food and shelter is often diverted to buy tobacco products. In the US alone, tobacco companies spend over $8 billion a year to market their products to consumers.
That's just under $1 million an hour. Given its widespread use and addictability, you wouldn't think this wildly popular yet seriously deadly plant would need any advertising dollars at all. The natural properties of tobacco guarantee customers keep coming back for more, even if it kills them. So what should we talk about next? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for new episodes every week. Bye! Hey, I'm Tasha the Amazon, and you're watching Floralogic. Today we're talking about Nicotiana. Hey, I'm Tasha the Amazon, and you're watching. Do it again! Yeah! With tobacco planted all around them, no wonder volcanoes smoke. That was a boom-ching. I got my drum set mixed up. By the time Europeans invaded the Americas, what you doing over there? Oh. This is roll out the barrel. We'll have a barrel of fun. Tobacco already had huge cultural, spiritual, and medical significance for many indigenous. Why is it such a shaky house? For many indigenous peoples, traditional tobacco deserves the highest respect, and it's not to be confused with the way For many indigenous peoples, traditional I can't talk. The tip of the teeth, the tongue, the lips, the tip of the teeth, the tongue, the lips. People smoking. The natural properties are mad, or crazy, or wild. Ah! Scorps, 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 scorps. Put tobacco on the scorps, scorps, scorps. Put it on the scorps to help the sting. Put it on the scorpy, scorp, scorp.
This is one of the world's most ancient crops that has been in use since before we even recorded history. This plant seed may harmlessly adorn your morning bagel, its flowers may bring a pop of color to your garden, but its milk is at the heart of one of today's major health crises. This is the opium poppy.
Papaver somniferum, otherwise known as the opium poppy or bread seed poppy, is as essential for humanity as it is deadly.